Get that woman out of my lobby before she stinks up the marble. Richard Vance hurled his coffee cup into the trash so hard it cracked, then jabbed his finger an inch from Ava Sinclair's face, without ever meeting her eyes. You deaf move! You don't belong in this building, and you never will! He seized the sleeve of her plain gray coat and yanked, spinning her half off the bench, while 5 executives laughed. Ava didn't flinch. She calmly opened her portfolio and began to write. In 45 minutes, the hand that had just grabbed her would be begging her not to end his career. Before we go on, if you believe in dignity, if you believe respect should never depend on a person's skin or their shoes, please subscribe to this channel and stay with me all the way to the end of this story, because the ending will stay with you for a long time. And tell me in the comments which city you are watching from right now, so I can see just how far Ava Sinclair's story has traveled across this country and around the world. Ava Sinclair arrived at Whitman Tower at exactly 10:15 in the morning, 15 minutes before her appointment. She came alone. No driver waited at the curb. No assistant hurried 3 steps behind her with a phone pressed to one ear. No black car idled with tinted windows. She walked in off the street like any other soul in Manhattan, in a coat that had cost less than $40, carrying nothing but a slim leather portfolio under her arm. She had chosen every detail on purpose. She wanted to see the building the way an ordinary person would see it. She wanted to know what Whitman Financial looked like when it thought no one important was watching. By the time she walked out again, she would know everything. The revolving door spun behind her and deposited her into a lobby of cold marble and colder people. A young woman at the reception desk looked up, and Ava watched the small flicker cross her face, the quick calculation that so many people made without ever knowing they were making it. The coat, the plain shoes, the lack of a lanyard, a badge, a driver, the color of her skin. In half a second, the receptionist had filed Ava into a category, and the category was not guest. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked in a voice that already suggested she could not. "Good morning," Ava said warmly. "I have a 10:30 appointment. Sinclair." The young woman typed. She frowned. She typed again. "I'm sorry I don't see a Sinclair anywhere on the schedule for today. Are you sure you have the right building?" "I'm quite sure," Ava said. "Could you check again? Perhaps under a company name. Sterling Horizon." More typing. Another frown. "No, nothing. Nothing under Sterling anything either." The receptionist leaned back, and the warmth she had never really offered now vanished entirely. "If you're not in the system, I really can't let you pass the lobby. You can wait over there if you'd like, but honestly, if you don't have an appointment, there's not much I can do for you." "That's fine," Ava said. "I'll wait." And that was the first mistake Whitman Financial made that morning, though it would not be the last, and it was far from the worst. Because if the receptionist had checked one more time, if she had picked up the phone and asked a single question, if anyone in that entire glittering tower had shown 1 ounce of ordinary curiosity, everything that followed might have been avoided. But no one did. They were all too certain. And certainty, Ava had learned across 36 years and $4 billion, was the most expensive thing a person could own. She walked to a low bench near the elevators and sat down. She placed her portfolio on her knees, and she began very quietly to watch. The lobby of Whitman Tower was a river of people, and Ava let the current move around her. She had spent her whole life being underestimated, and she had learned long ago that the people who dismiss you will tell you everything about themselves if you only stay still long enough to listen. So she stayed still. She listened. And within 10 minutes, the first of them arrived. He came out of an elevator with a phone in his hand and a coffee in the other, a big man in an expensive suit that strained slightly at the shoulders, and Ava would learn within the hour that his name was Gary Pruitt and that he ran the sales division. He was talking loudly the way certain men talk when they want a room to know they are in it. He crossed the marble floor, and then his eyes landed on Ava, and he stopped. "You!" he said, snapping his fingers at her. "You, the delivery. I've been waiting on a package all morning. Where's the cart?" Ava looked up at him calmly. "I'm not a delivery." "You're not?" He looked at her coat, her portfolio, and something in his face curdled. "Then what are you doing sitting there?" "This is the executive lobby. It's not a bus station." "I have an appointment," Ava said. Gary laughed one short bark of a laugh and turned to a colleague who had just joined him. "She has an appointment," he repeated, as if it were the funniest thing he had heard all week. "With who, Santa Claus?" The colleague chuckled. Gary shook his head and walked toward the elevators, and as he passed the reception desk, he said loud enough for Ava to hear, "Chelsea, why is that woman still sitting in our lobby? Get security to move her along before a client sees her." Ava opened her portfolio. She wrote a single line. "Gary Pruitt Sales, 1026. Assumed I was a delivery. Requested my removal." She closed it again. Her face never changed. Now here is the thing you must understand about Ava Sinclair, because the rest of the story turns on it. She was not sitting in that lobby to be hurt. She had been hurt before so many times in so many rooms that a rude man with a coffee cup could no more wound her than a raindrop could knock down a house. She had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Baltimore with a mother who cleaned offices at night and a father who drove a bus at dawn, and she had learned the taste of being unseen before she was old enough to spell the word. She had earned a scholarship, then a degree, then a job on a trading floor where men twice her age had called her the intern for 3 years, even after she outperformed every one of them. She had built Sterling Horizon Capital from a single borrowed desk into a firm that moved billions, and she had done it while being doubted at every single step by every single person who looked like the men now laughing at her in this lobby. So she was not sitting there to be hurt. She was sitting there to gather the truth. Because Sterling Horizon had 3 weeks earlier quietly completed the acquisition of Whitman Financial Group for $2.4 billion, and Ava was now, as of the closing that very morning at 9 a.m., the controlling owner and incoming chairwoman of the entire company. The board upstairs was waiting for her. Her chief of staff was waiting for her, and she had made a decision, sitting in her own car the night before that. Before she ever revealed a single thing, she would walk into her new company as a stranger and see with her own eyes how it treated the people it thought could do nothing for it. She had heard rumors, complaints buried in HR files she had reviewed during the due diligence, whispers about a culture rotten at the root. She wanted to know if the rumors were true. In 45 minutes, she would have all the proof she would ever need. The second executive arrived at 10:31. This was a sharp, thin woman in a charcoal suit who moved through the lobby the way a knife moves through paper, and Ava would learn she was Diane Holloway, the chief operating officer. She spotted Ava immediately, and her mouth tightened. "Chelsea," Diane called to the receptionist without breaking stride. "Is there a reason there's a woman camped out on our furniture?" "She says she has an appointment, Ms. Holloway, but she's not in the system. I've checked twice." Diane turned and looked at Ava fully for the first time, up and down, slow and cold. "There's no appointment," she said, not to Ava, but about her, as if Ava were a piece of furniture that had been left in the wrong place. "Look at her. She wandered in off the street. It happens. The homeless situation in this city is out of control." She said the word homeless, the way another person might say the word cockroach. "Ma'am, this is a private financial institution. You cannot loiter here. Do you understand me? Do you speak English?" "I speak English," Ava said quietly. "Then you understand that you need to leave." "I understand," Ava said, "that I have a 10:30 appointment, and I am waiting for it." Diane's face went hard as glass. "There is no appointment. I will not say it again. If you're still here in 5 minutes, I'm calling security, and after that I'm calling the police. Am I making myself clear?" And without waiting for an answer, because a person like Diane Holloway never waited for answers from a person like the one she imagined Ava to be, she spun on her heel and clicked away toward the elevators. Ava opened the portfolio. "Diane Holloway, COO, 10:33, called me homeless, asked if I speak English, threatened police." She wrote it in a clear, steady hand, and she noticed that her hand did not shake, and she was almost sad that it did not, because there had been a time in her life, a younger and softer time, when a moment like this would have made her hands shake for hours. Not anymore. Now she simply wrote it down. A twist was already forming in that lobby, though not one of the executives could feel it yet. The twist was this. Every single one of them believed they were dealing with a nobody, a stray and inconvenience, and every single one of them was at that very moment auditioning for their own dismissal in front of the one person on earth who held their careers in her hands. They thought they were the powerful ones. They were performing their cruelty for their new owner, and they did not know it, and each new insult was another line in a report that would end their working lives. By 10:40, word had somehow spread among the executive floor that there was a situation in the lobby, and one by one, as if drawn by the smell of someone weaker than themselves, they came down to look. The third was a heavy-set man named Marcus Reed, who was head of human resources, which Ava found as she watched him approach to be almost too perfect to be believed. Human resources, the very department meant to protect people. He walked over to her with the air of a man about to do a distasteful but necessary chore. "All right," Marcus said, clapping his hands together softly. "I've had 3 separate complaints about you now." 3. Do you know what that means? That means you are creating a disturbance. As head of HR, I'm telling you that you are at this moment trespassing on private property, and I'd strongly advise you to leave before this becomes a legal matter. "May I ask you a question?" Ava said. Marcus blinked, surprised she had spoken so calmly. "What? Has anyone here asked me my name?" He stared at her. "Has anyone," Ava went on gently, "checked the system a second time? Has anyone called upstairs? Has anyone asked who I am here to see? Or did everyone simply look at me and decide?" For 1/2 of 1 second, something moved behind Marcus Reed's eyes, some tiny buried instinct that whispered, "Wait, ask something is wrong." And here is the tragedy of the whole morning, because that instinct was correct, and if he had followed it, he alone of the 6 might have walked out of that building with his career intact. But he was a proud man in front of an audience, and pride swallowed the whisper whole. "I don't need to ask your name," Marcus said, straightening. "I know exactly what you are. You're someone who doesn't belong here. Now I've been polite. I won't be polite again." He walked away. Ava wrote it down. Marcus Reed, HR, 1042. Accused me of trespassing. Refused to ask my name after being invited to. She underlined the word refused. That word she thought would matter a great deal in the weeks to come. The lobby had become by now a kind of theater, and Ava was the show. She could feel eyes on her from the reception desk, from the security post by the door, from the little clusters of employees who slowed down as they crossed the marble to catch a glimpse of the woman causing all the fuss. And not one of them, not one single soul in that enormous tower felt the smallest urge to sit down beside her and simply ask if she was all right. She noted that too, though she did not write it down. She kept it somewhere deeper. At 10:47, the 4th arrived, and this one frightened even Ava a little, not for herself, but for what he represented. His name was Jonathan Pierce, and he was general counsel, the top lawyer of the entire firm, and he arrived not with insults, but with the calm, smiling menace of a man who has learned to make cruelty sound like procedure. "Good morning," Jonathan said, and his voice was pleasant, which was somehow worse. He crouched down slightly so that he was at her eye level, the way one might speak to a child, and Ava understood immediately that this was a performance of kindness designed to be a weapon. "I'm the head of the legal department here at Whitman. I understand there's been some confusion this morning. Let me explain your situation to you very clearly so there's no misunderstanding." "Please," Ava said. "You are on private property. You have been asked to leave by multiple representatives of this company. If you do not leave voluntarily, that becomes what we call criminal trespass. At that point, I will personally instruct security to physically remove you, and I will have the police charge you, and because you have no identification on you that connects you to any legitimate business here, you will most likely spend tonight in a cell." He smiled. "I'm telling you this as a courtesy, because I'd hate to see you go through all that over a simple misunderstanding. Do we understand each other?" Ava looked at him for a long moment. "You've assumed," she said slowly, "that I have no identification. You've assumed I have no legitimate business here. You've assumed all of it without asking me a single question. In your entire career as a lawyer, Mr. Pierce has assuming things ever gone badly for you." The smile flickered, just for an instant. "I don't need to know your name," he said, echoing Marcus without realizing it, "to know that you don't belong in this building." "You keep saying that word," Ava said. "Belong. I find it very interesting that all of you keep saying that word." And she opened her portfolio, and while Jonathan Pierce watched, she wrote his name and the time and every threat he had made in that same steady, unhurried hand. He watched her write it. He did not understand what he was watching. He straightened up, adjusted his tie, and walked away, certain he had won. Now the lobby was crackling with a strange energy because the executives had begun to enjoy themselves. It had become a game to them, a sport, each one coming down to take a turn, each one topping the last. And the fifth to arrive turned it uglier still. Her name was Sandra Kowalski, the chief financial officer, a woman with hard, bright eyes and a laugh like breaking glass, and she did not bother crouching or explaining or threatening. She simply walked up, looked Ava over, and laughed. "Oh my God," Sandra said to no one and everyone. "Is this her? Is this the famous lobby lady I had to come see for myself?" She circled Ava slowly, examining her the way a buyer examines livestock. "Look at that coat. Where'd you get that honey off a dead person, and the shoes?" She laughed again. "You know, the sad thing is, some people just don't have the sense God gave them. You come into a place like this, a place full of people who work with numbers all day, people with real intelligence, and you actually think you belong. That's not stubbornness. That's just, it's almost sweet how clueless you are." "Are you finished?" Ava asked. "Am I finished?" Sandra grinned at the crowd. "She wants to know if I'm finished." "No, sweetheart, I don't think I am. Because I want to understand something. I want to understand what goes through a person's head when they look in the mirror and decide today's the day I'm going to go embarrass myself at a Wall Street firm. Do you not have anyone in your life, anyone at all, who could have told you no?" And for the first and only time that entire morning, Ava Sinclair felt something rise in her chest, hot and old and familiar, and she pushed it back down. Because Sandra Kowalski could not know that Ava's mother, who had cleaned offices, exactly like this one, who had scrubbed the toilets of women, exactly like Sandra, had told Ava every single night of her childhood one thing and one thing only. "Let them show you who they are. Then you'll always know what to do." "Thank you," Ava said quietly. Sandra blinked. "For what?" "For showing me who you are." Something in the way she said it made even Sandra Kowalski pause. But the moment passed, and Sandra laughed it off and walked away, and Ava wrote her name in the portfolio, and the ink was pressed a little harder into the page this time, though her face still had not changed. It was 10:58 now. 43 minutes had passed since she walked through the door. She had one more executive to meet the man at the very top, and she did not have to wait long. Richard Vance, Chief Executive Officer of Whitman Financial, did not come down to the lobby to look at Ava. He came down because he was leaving for a lunch, and Ava simply happened to be in his path, and that, in a way, was the most damning thing of all, because the others had at least come to see her. Richard Vance did not consider her worth a special trip. She was to him an obstacle no different from a spill on the floor or a chair left in the aisle. He strode across the marble with 2 junior staff scrambling behind him, and he saw Ava, and he stopped dead, and his face contorted with an anger so pure and so instant that the entire lobby went quiet. "What," he said, "is this?" "Sir, we've been trying to remove her all morning," Chelsea said quickly from the desk. "She won't leave. She claims she has an appointment." An appointment. Richard turned to Ava, and now he did what none of the others had done, what was somehow the cruelest thing of all. He addressed her not as a person, but as a problem he was solving out loud. "You see, this is what happens when the front desk gets soft. One person shows a little weakness, lets one stray sit down, and by lunchtime you've got the whole street thinking our lobby is a shelter." He never once spoke to Ava. He spoke about her over her past her. "Get her out of my lobby, now. I don't care who she thinks she is. She's not on the list, she doesn't belong here, and frankly she's lowering the tone of the entire floor." And he laughed. And 5 executives who had gathered by now near the elevators to watch the show laughed with him. The sound of it rolled across the marble and washed over Ava, where she sat, and she let it wash over her. And she wrote his name in her portfolio while he laughed, and she wrote the time, 10:59, and she wrote the words he had used. And then she closed the portfolio, and she set it down on the bench beside her, and she stood up. The laughter stopped. She stood, and she was not tall, and she was not loud, and she wore a $40 coat. But there was something in the way she rose that made every person in that lobby fall silent all at once, the way a room falls silent without knowing why. She smoothed her coat. She picked up her portfolio, and she walked unhurried across the marble floor toward the executive elevator. "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" Richard stepped into her path. "Where do you think you're going?" "Upstairs," Ava said. "That elevator is for executives and their guests only. You are neither." He gestured to the security guard by the door, a young man who had been watching all morning with growing unease. "Miller, escort this woman out. If she resists, you know what to do." The security guard Miller walked over slowly. Ava turned and looked at him, and he looked back at her, and Ava saw in his young face the one thing she had not seen in any of the 6 executives all morning long. She saw doubt. She saw a person actually looking at her, actually wondering, actually afraid he was about to do something wrong. "Ma'am," Miller said quietly, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." "Miller," Ava said, just as quietly. "What's your first name?" He hesitated. "David." "David." She nodded. "I want you to remember this moment for the rest of your career, because in about 90 seconds, this is going to be the most important morning of your life, and I want you to be able to tell people that when everyone else in this lobby was wrong, you were the only one who paused." She reached into the collar of her plain coat, and she drew out a thin chain, and on the chain hung a small silver insignia, an emblem that everyone in Whitman Financial had been trained to recognize because it had appeared on every internal document for the past 3 weeks ever since the acquisition rumors began. The insignia of Sterling Horizon Capital. David Miller's eyes went wide. Richard Vance saw it too. And for the very first time all morning, something crossed the CEO's face that was not contempt. It was the faint, cold beginning of fear, the way the temperature drops just before the storm, before the mind has even understood why. "Where?" Richard said, and his voice had changed, had thinned. "Did you get that?" Ava did not answer him. She stepped around him, and this time he did not block her. She pressed the button for the executive elevator, and the doors slid open, and she stepped inside, and she turned to face the lobby, and she looked at the 6 of them standing there, Gary and Diane and Marcus and Jonathan and Sandra and Richard, all 6 of them, who had spent 45 minutes teaching her exactly who they were. "You're welcome to join me," Ava said. "The board is expecting all of us." And she pressed the button for the top floor. The doors began to close. And in the last half-second before they sealed shut, Ava watched the confidence drain out of all 6 faces. At once, watched it drain like water out of a cracked glass, and she watched Richard Vance take one lurching step forward, his hand coming up, his mouth opening to say something, anything. And then the doors closed on the words before they could leave his throat, and the elevator began to rise. Inside, there was silence. The 6 of them had crowded in at the last moment, unable to stop themselves, drawn upward by the terrible pull of not knowing. And now they stood pressed together in that small mirrored box, with the woman they had spent all morning tormenting, and not one of them could find a single word to say. Ava stood at the front facing the doors, her portfolio under her arm, watching the numbers climb. Sandra Kowalski was the one who finally spoke, and her voice, which had been so sharp and bright in the lobby, came out thin and cracked. "Whoever you are," she said, "I'm sure this is all a big misunderstanding. We were doing our jobs, protecting the building. You understand." Ava said nothing. "The economy's crazy right now." Sandra went on faster now, the words tumbling out. "You get all kinds of people wandering in. You can't be too careful, that's all it was. We were being careful, that's all." Ava said nothing. The numbers climbed, 26, 27, 28. "Look," Richard said, and he had drawn himself up, trying to find the man he had been 10 minutes ago. "Let's all just take a breath. Clearly there's been some confusion about who's expected today. If you're here on behalf of Sterling Horizon, then obviously we want to extend every courtesy. Every courtesy. I'm sure whatever happened downstairs, we can smooth it all over. No harm done, right? No real harm done." And Ava turned around, slowly. And she looked at Richard Vance, and she looked at each of them in turn, and when she spoke, her voice was soft and clear, and it filled that small space completely. "No harm done," she repeated. "Do you know, Richard, that in the last 45 minutes, I counted 11 employees who walked through that lobby, saw what was happening, and looked away? 11. People who work for you, who have watched you, who have learned from you what this company rewards and what it punishes. That's not confusion. That's not being careful. That's a culture, your culture, and you built it. Richard's mouth opened, but nothing came out. You want to know how I got the insignia? Ava said. You want to know who I am. You've wanted to know for the last 90 seconds, which is interesting because for 45 minutes, not one of you wanted to know at all. The elevator slowed. The numbers stopped climbing. 44, the top floor. You're about to find out. And I'll tell you something, all 6 of you, before those doors open. My mother cleaned offices like this one for 30 years. On her knees at night, when men like you had all gone home, and every night she told me the same thing. The elevator settled with a soft chime. Let them show you who they are, then you'll always know what to do. The doors slid open onto the top floor of Whitman Tower, onto a long, bright corridor, and standing there, waiting, immaculate in a dark suit with a tablet in his hand, was a man who broke into a warm and relieved smile the instant he saw her. Chairwoman Sinclair, he said, stepping forward. Welcome. The board is assembled and ready whenever you are. The word landed in the elevator like a stone dropped into still water. Chairwoman. Ava watched it hit them. She watched Sandra Kowalski's hand rise slowly to her own mouth. She watched Marcus Reed's face go the color of paper. She watched Jonathan Pierce, the lawyer, the man who had threatened her with a jail cell, close his eyes as though he might be able to make the last hour disappear behind his own eyelids. She watched Diane Holloway grip the elevator rail as if the floor had tilted beneath her. She watched Gary Pruitt, who had snapped his fingers at her and called her a delivery, open and close his mouth like a fish pulled out of water. And she watched Richard Vance, chief executive officer of a company he had run for 11 years, a company that had at 9 o'clock that very morning stopped being his understand at last exactly what he had done. Thank you, Thomas, Ava said to her chief of staff. She stepped out of the elevator, and then she turned and she held the door with one hand, and she looked back at the 6 of them still frozen inside, still unable to move, still trapped in the small mirrored box that had carried them all the way up to the moment their world ended. Come in, she said, and her voice was almost gentle now, which was the most frightening thing of all of you. The board is waiting, and there's a great deal we need to discuss about what I saw this morning. None of them moved. Come in, Ava said again. It wasn't a request. And one by one, on legs that had gone weak beneath them, the 6 executives who had spent 45 minutes refusing to see the woman in the plain gray coat stepped out of the elevator and followed her down the long, bright corridor toward the boardroom, toward the truth, toward the seat at the head of the table that had, without any of them knowing it, belonged to her all along. The corridor to the boardroom was the longest walk any of the 6 executives had ever taken. Ava Sinclair led the way with her chief of staff at her side, and behind her came the parade of the fallen 6 people who 10 minutes ago had ruled this company and now shuffled forward like children summoned to a principal's office. No one spoke. The only sound was footsteps and the ragged breathing of Sandra Kowalski, who had started to hyperventilate somewhere around the elevator and had not stopped. Thomas, Ava said quietly to the man beside her, is everything ready? Everything, Thomas answered. The board's been assembled since 9:40. The full financials are up on the screen, and the lobby footage is queued and ready exactly as you asked. Behind them, Jonathan Pierce heard the words lobby footage, and his stomach dropped straight through the floor. The boardroom doors opened, and inside 11 members of the Whitman Financial Board of Directors rose to their feet. Every one of them. They rose the way people rise for a judge or a queen, and the 6 executives who trailed in behind Ava watched their own board, the board. They answered to the board. They had sat before 1,000 times stand up in respect for the woman in the $40 coat. Chairwoman Sinclair, said the lead director, an older man named Bill Hargrove, extending his hand. It's an honor. The transfer of controlling interest closed at 9 this morning. Everything is in order. The company is yours. Thank you, Bill, Ava said, and she shook his hand warmly, and then she walked the length of the enormous table to the seat at the very head of it, the chairman's seat, Richard Vance's seat. She set her portfolio down in front of it. She did not sit yet. She turned, and she faced the room, and she looked at the 6 people frozen just inside the door. Sit down, she said. All 6 of you, not there. Gary Pruitt had automatically drifted toward his usual chair among the executive team. There. She pointed to 6 chairs that had been arranged, Ava noticed with cold satisfaction, in a single row along the far wall. Away from the board, away from the table, set apart like defendants. They sat, because there was nothing else in the world they could do. Ava let the silence stretch. She had learned the power of silence in 1,000 negotiations, and she used it now, letting the 6 of them marinate in it, letting them feel every second. Then at last she pulled out the chairman's chair, and she sat down in it, and she folded her hands on the table. "I want to start," she said, "by telling you all a story. It won't take long. This morning at 10:15, a woman walked into the lobby of this building. She had an appointment. She was 15 minutes early. She was polite to everyone she met. And over the next 45 minutes, 6 senior executives of this company took turns humiliating her." She looked down the row. "I know all of this because that woman was me." Bill Hargrove leaned forward sharply. "What did you say?" "You heard me right, Bill." Ava's eyes never left the 6. "I came in as a stranger, on purpose, because during the due diligence my team flagged something. Buried complaints, turnover numbers that didn't make sense, a pattern that looked on paper like a company with a sickness in it. And I decided that before I signed a single order as chairwoman, I would find out for myself whether that sickness was real." She paused. "It's real." Marcus Reed, the head of HR, made a small sound in his throat like a man about to speak and thought better of it. "You want to say something, Marcus?" Ava asked. "Please. You had so much to say to me downstairs." Marcus's mouth worked. Chairwoman, I had no way of knowing." "That's the point," Ava said, and her voice cut clean through his. "You had no way of knowing. So let me ask you the same question I asked you an hour ago when I was a nobody in a cheap coat. Did you ask me my name?" Silence. "Did you?" "No," Marcus whispered. "I invited you to. Do you remember I stood there and I asked you, 'Has anyone here asked my name?' And you told me, and I'm going to quote you exactly because I wrote it down, you told me I don't need to ask your name. I know exactly what you are." Ava tilted her head. "So tell me, Marcus, what am I?" Marcus Reed, head of human resources of Whitman Financial, put his face in his hands and said nothing at all. It was 11:10 now. 55 minutes since Ava had walked through the revolving door, and the room had tilted so completely on its axis that some of the board members were gripping the table. "Now," Ava continued, "I could sit here and tell you what happened, but I've found in my line of work that people have a remarkable ability to remember things the way they wish they'd gone, so I'm not going to tell you." She glanced at Thomas. "I'm going to show you. Thomas, please." Thomas Wu touched his tablet, and the enormous screen at the end of the boardroom flickered to life, and the lobby of Whitman Tower appeared in crisp, clear, high definition with a timestamp running in the corner and audio. "No," said Gary Pruitt, suddenly half rising. "No, hold on, you can't just—" "Sit down, Gary," Ava said without even looking at him, and he sat. The footage began at 10:26. The whole room watched Gary Pruitt stride across the marble, coffee in hand, and stop in front of the woman on the bench. They watched him snap his fingers at her. They heard his voice tinny but perfectly clear through the boardroom speakers. You the delivery." And then Chelsea, "Why is that woman still sitting in our lobby? Get security to move her along before a client sees her." Bill Hargrove turned slowly to look at Gary Pruitt, and the look on the old director's face was something Gary would remember on his deathbed. That's out of context," Gary stammered. "We get deliveries all the time, I thought." "Keep watching," Ava said. The footage rolled on, 10:33. Diane Holloway, sharp and cold, her voice slicing across the lobby. "Is there a reason there's a woman camped out on our furniture?" And then the words that made 2 of the board members physically recoil. "The homeless situation in this city is out of control. Ma'am, do you speak English?" Diane Holloway sat with her spine rigid and her jaw clenched, and Ava watched a single bead of sweat run down the woman's temple. "I run operations for a living," Diane said tightly. "Security is part of operations. I was doing my job." "Your job?" Ava repeated. "Was calling a paying guest, homeless, part of your job?" Diane was asking a black woman if she spoke English. Part of your job? I'd love to see that in your job description. Thomas, do we have Miss Holloway's job description on file? We do, chairwoman. Does it mention any of that? It does not. Diane said nothing more. Her hands had begun very slightly to tremble, and she pressed them flat against her thighs to stop them. It was 11:15. The footage kept rolling, and there was no mercy in it because a camera has no mercy. A camera does not forget, and does not soften, and does not remember things the way it wishes they had gone. Marcus Reed appeared on the screen, telling Ava she was trespassing, refusing to ask her name. The whole board heard Ava's calm voice ask him gently, "Has anyone here asked me my name?" And they heard Marcus refuse. And Bill Hargrove pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose as though he had a headache coming on. Then came Jonathan Pierce. The footage showed the general counsel crouching down to Ava's eye level, that awful performance of kindness. And the whole board heard him explain in his smooth, pleasant lawyer's voice exactly how he would have her arrested. "You will most likely spend tonight in a cell. I'm telling you this as a courtesy." Jonathan Pierce, who had built an entire career on knowing exactly what to say and when to say it, discovered in that moment that there is no clever thing a lawyer can say when the whole world has just heard him threaten to jail an innocent woman for the crime of sitting down. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He stared at his own hands. "I want to pause here," Ava said, and Thomas froze the frame holding Jonathan's smiling face on the giant screen. "Because Mr. Pierce is our top attorney. He's the man this company relies on to keep it out of legal trouble. And I want everyone in this room to understand something about what we just watched." She stood, and she walked slowly around the table, and she stopped behind Jonathan's chair, and he did not dare turn to look at her. Mr. Pierce threatened a guest with false arrest. He threatened to fabricate a criminal charge. He did it based on nothing but the way I looked. Bill, as a member of the board, do you understand what kind of liability that single conversation exposes this company to? Millions, Bill Hargrove said grimly. Potentially far more. Millions, Ava echoed. From the man we pay to prevent exactly that. She leaned down close to Jonathan's ear, and she spoke very softly, but the room was so silent that everyone heard it. You told me my assumptions had never gone badly for me. Do you remember, Mr. Pierce? You said you didn't need to know my name. Was that good legal advice? Would you bill a client for that? Jonathan Pierce. General counsel made a sound that was almost a sob and swallowed it. 11:20. And still the footage had not shown the worst of it, because Ava had made sure when she instructed Thomas that the board would see all of it in order, building and building, so that they would feel what she had felt, minute by minute on that bench. Sandra Kowalski appeared on the screen. The board watched their chief financial officer circle the woman on the bench like a shark. They heard her laugh. They heard in that bright, cruel voice, "Where'd you get that coat, honey, off a dead person?" They heard her mock Ava's intelligence, ask if she had anyone in her life who could have told her no, and the boardroom went so cold and so quiet that Sandra's own recorded laughter seemed to echo off the walls and come back to slap her across the face. "Turn it off," Sandra said suddenly. "Turn it off, I can't." Her voice broke. "I don't need to see it. I know what I said. Please turn it off." "No," Ava said. "You made me sit through it live, Sandra. You can watch it once." And Sandra Kowalski, who had laughed like breaking glass, put her head down on the row of chairs and wept. But Ava did not stop the footage, and she did not soften, because there was one more, and he was the one who mattered most. 11:22. Richard Vance appeared on the screen. The board watched their CEO stride across the marble. They watched him stop. They heard his voice, and it was worse on the recording than it had been in life, because on the recording there was no distraction, no movement, nothing but the pure ugliness of the words. "Get her out of my lobby. I don't care who she thinks she is. She's not on the list. She doesn't belong here. And frankly, she's lowering the tone of the entire floor." And then the laughter. Richard's laughter, and 5 other voices joining in, rolling across the marble. And then the footage showed the moment that made the entire board draw breath as one. It showed Richard Vance seize the collar of Ava's coat and haul her up off the bench and shove her toward the doors while he shouted, "This is a bank, not a shelter. Somebody get security before she robs the place." Bill Hargrove stood up. He stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall, and he pointed at the screen with a shaking hand, and he said in a voice like gravel, "You put your hands on her. You physically assaulted the majority owner of this company in our own lobby." "I didn't know who she was," Richard shouted, and it burst out of him at last, all the fear and rage and desperation of the past 20 minutes. How was I supposed to know? She came in dressed like that. No ID, no appointment in the system, no security, nothing. Anyone would have thought the same thing. Any of you would have done exactly what I did. And the room went silent. Ava let that silence sit. Then she walked back to the head of the table, and she stood behind the chairman's chair, and she gripped its back with both hands, and she looked at Richard Vance, and when she spoke, her voice was very quiet and very steady. "You just said something important, Richard. You said any of us would have done the same thing. So let me tell you why that's the most dangerous sentence in this entire building." She looked around the table at the board at the 6 along the wall. "Because it's the sentence that lets it keep happening. It's the sentence that says the problem wasn't you. The problem was me for daring to walk in looking the way I looked. It's the sentence that turns cruelty into common sense." She paused. "But it isn't true, because there was one person in that lobby who didn't do the same thing." She turned to Thomas. "Play the last clip." The screen changed. It showed the security guard, David Miller, young and uncertain, walking toward Ava. And the board heard Ava ask his name and heard him say David and heard her tell him to remember this moment. And they watched on the screen the one human being in that entire lobby who had looked at the woman on the bench and felt something was wrong. They watched him hesitate. They watched him pause. "That young man," Ava said, "makes $14 an hour. He has no title, no corner office, no stock options, and he was the only person in this building this morning with the decency to doubt himself." She let that land. "So no, Richard. Not anyone would have done what you did. A 23-year-old security guard making $14 an hour didn't do what you did. That's the difference between you and him. And it's got nothing to do with intelligence or education or the numbers you're all so proud of. It's got to do with who you are when you think no one important is watching." The room was absolutely still. "Thomas," Ava said, "where is David Miller right now?" "Still in the lobby, chairwoman. His shift ends at 2. "Have someone relieve him and ask him to come up here. I want to speak with him." She looked at the 6 along the wall. "I want him to see this." It was 11:29 now, and Ava sat back down in the chairman's chair, and she opened her portfolio, the same portfolio she had written in on the bench, and she laid it flat, and she looked down the row of 6 ruined faces. "Here is what happens now," she said, "and I want the board to hear it too so that there's no confusion, no back channel, no quiet deals made after I leave the room." She turned a page. "Gary Pruitt, head of sales. You mistook a guest for a delivery and demanded her removal. On its own embarrassing, combined with everything else part of a pattern. You're terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct." Gary made a strangled noise. 22 years, he said. "I gave this company 22 years. "You gave this company 22 years, Ava said. "And this morning you showed me who you'd been for all 22 of them, Diane Holloway." Diane lifted her chin, the last shred of her pride, holding her spine straight. "Say it then. You called a guest homeless. You asked a black woman if she spoke English. You threatened her with the police for the crime of sitting down. As chief operating officer, you set the tone for every manager beneath you, and this is the tone you set. You're terminated effective immediately." "You can't fire me for one bad morning," Diane snapped, and there was real fury in it now, the fury of the cornered. "I have run the operations of this company flawlessly for 9 years. 9 years. One incident does not erase—" "It wasn't one incident," Ava said. "Thomas, the HR files." Thomas touched his tablet. A new document filled the screen, rows and rows of names, dates, complaints. "During due diligence," Ava said, "my team pulled every internal complaint filed in the last 5 years. There are 147 of them alleging discrimination, harassment, or bias. 147. And do you know how many were ever fully investigated?" She looked at Marcus Reed. "Marcus, you ran HR. How many—" Marcus Reed did not answer. 9, Ava said. 9 out of 147. The other 138 were closed, marked as resolved, buried. She let her eyes travel down the row. So no Diane. It wasn't one bad morning. This morning was just the first time it happened to someone who owned the building. That was the twist that landed hardest of all, and Ava watched it detonate down the row one face at a time as the 6 of them understood for the first time that this was not about a single lobby, a single cruelty, a single mistake. It was about a machine they had all built and fed and profited from, and the machine had finally catastrophically chewed on the wrong person. Marcus Reed, Ava went on, 138 complaints buried on your watch. You are not just terminated. My legal team, not Mr. Pierce's, will be reviewing every single one of those closed files. And if there is evidence that you knowingly suppressed valid complaints, you'll be hearing from more than me. Marcus made the sound of a man who has just felt the ground open beneath him. Jonathan Pierce. Ava turned to the lawyer. You threatened false arrest. You exposed this company to enormous liability. And you're the person we trusted to protect us from exactly that. Terminated effective immediately. And I'd strongly suggest you retain counsel of your own, Mr. Pierce. You're going to need it. I understand you know a good place to spend the night if you can't afford bail. Jonathan Pierce flinched as though she had struck him. Sandra Kowalski. Sandra lifted her head. Her makeup had run down her face in gray streaks. I know, she whispered. I know. I'm fired. I heard. You're fired, Ava agreed. But I want to say something to you specifically, Sandra, because of everyone in that lobby, you're the one I keep coming back to. The others were cold, dismissive, cruel in the ordinary way that people are cruel when they've decided you don't count. But you weren't cold. You enjoyed it. You circled me. You performed. You asked if I had anyone in my life who could have told me no. Ava's voice dropped. My mother told me no plenty of times, Sandra. She told me no when I wanted to quit. She told me no when I wanted to believe the men on the trading floor who said I'd never make it. She cleaned offices like this one for 30 years so that I could sit in this chair. So yes, I had someone in my life. I had her, and she was worth 10 of you. Sandra Kowalski dissolved completely, and then there was only one left. 11:38. 53 minutes since Richard Vance had first crossed the marble and decided the woman on the bench was lowering the tone of his floor. Richard Vance, Ava said. He was still standing. He had never sat back down after Bill Hargrove had risen against him. He stood there at the far end of the row, this big, powerful man who had run a company for 11 years, and Ava could see that some final calculation was still turning behind his eyes, some last desperate hope that there was a play he could make a lever. He could pull a version of this where he walked out intact. Ms. Sinclair, he said, and his voice had gone smooth and low, the boardroom voice, the voice he used to close deals and charm regulators. I think we both know that terminating me publicly like this in front of the board without process opens this company to significant legal exposure. I've given 11 years. I have a contract with protections. I have relationships with half the clients in this building. You need me whether you like me or not. So why don't you and I step outside, just the two of us, and discuss a transition that works for everybody? Executives get removed all the time. It doesn't have to be ugly. It doesn't have to be this. And for a moment, the room held its breath because it was, Ava had to admit, a good play. Cold and calculated and shameless, but good. It was the play of a man who had survived 100 boardroom knife fights. Ava looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, and it was not a warm smile. Richard, you're the CEO. You're supposed to be the smartest man in the building. She tapped her portfolio. And you still haven't asked the one question that matters. You haven't asked it all morning. Not one of you has. She looked down the whole row. So let me answer it for you, since none of you will ask. You want to know why my name wasn't in the system this morning. You want to know why reception couldn't find my appointment. You've all been so sure it proved I didn't belong. She stood slowly, and she walked around the table until she stood directly in front of Richard Vance, and she looked up into his face, this small woman in a $40 coat, looking up at the man who had grabbed her collar, and she did not blink. My name wasn't in the system, she said, because I had it removed, last night, personally. I called your head of building security at 9 p.m. I identified myself as the incoming owner, and I instructed him to strip my appointment from every calendar and every log in this building, and to tell no one. She paused. I wanted to walk in invisible. I wanted to see what this company does to a person it thinks is nobody. And every single one of you, everyone, gave me exactly what I came to find. Richard Vance's face went completely white. You set us up, he breathed. No, Ava said. I gave you a mirror. What you did in front of it was entirely your own choice. I removed my name from a computer, Richard. I didn't tell you to grab my coat. I didn't tell you to call me a thief in front of 40 people. I didn't put those words in your mouth. They were already there. They've always been there. I just created a morning where you finally said them out loud to the one person who could do something about it. The room was silent except for Sandra Kowalski's quiet weeping. You're terminated, Ava said. For cause. For gross misconduct, for physical assault of a guest, and for 11 years of building a culture that produced everything we watched on that screen today. Your contract protections do not survive a for-cause termination, as I'm sure Mr. Pierce could confirm if Mr. Pierce were still employed here. She turned away from him. Thomas, has security been briefed? They're waiting outside, Chairwoman. Then it's time. But Richard Vance was not finished, because men like Richard Vance are never finished until they are dragged out, and he took a step toward her, his hand coming up his face, twisting, and he said, You think you can just walk in here in your little costume and destroy people's lives? You think this is justice? You humiliated us. You planned it. You sat there and let us dig our own graves, and you call yourself the victim. You are a vindictive, calculating... Careful, Richard, Ava said quietly. The board is watching now, and so is the camera in this room. Would you like to add to the recording because I have all day? Richard Vance stopped. His hand dropped, and whatever he saw in Ava Sinclair's face, whatever certainty, whatever bone, deep, unshakable calm, it finally broke him because the great man's shoulders sagged and the boardroom voice was gone, and what came out instead was small and cracked and almost pleading. I have a family, he said, a mortgage. I have a daughter in college. You take this from me like this publicly for cause, and I'll never work in this industry again. You know that. You know exactly what you're doing to me. And Ava Sinclair looked at him, and for just 1 second, something flickered across her face, and it was not triumph, and it was not cruelty. It was something older and sadder than that. I know exactly what I'm doing to you, she said softly. You want to know how I know? Because a man just like you did it to my mother, 26 years ago. She'd worked in a building like this one for 11 years. 11 years, Richard, the same as you. And one morning a vice president decided she'd looked at him wrong, and he had her fired for cause, no severance, no reference on nothing but his word against hers. She had a family too, a mortgage too, a daughter. Ava's voice did not rise, but it filled the room completely. She never worked in an office again. She cleaned them at night instead for the next 20 years, until her knees gave out. And not once, not one single time in all those years did that vice president lose a minute of sleep over what he'd done to her. Because to him, she was nobody. She lowered the tone of the floor. The room was so silent, it hurt. So when you ask me if I know what I'm doing to you, Ava said, yes, I know. I've known my whole life. The only thing that's different this time is which one of us is sitting in the chairman's seat. And that was the twist beneath all the other twists, the one no one in that room had seen coming. The reason a woman worth $4 billion would spend 45 minutes letting herself be humiliated on a marble bench when she could have swept in with an army. It had never only been about Whitman Financial. It had been about a night shift and a pair of ruined knees and a little girl who had promised her mother that someday, somehow, she would sit at the head of a table like this one, and she would make sure the people at it remembered what it cost to treat a human being like nothing. The doors opened. 2 members of building security stepped inside, and behind them, uncertain and wide-eyed, came the young guard. David Miller called up from the lobby, not understanding yet why he had been summoned to the top floor of the building. David, Ava said, and her whole voice changed, warmed, softened. Come in. Thank you for coming up. Ma'am, he said, and then catching himself, Chairwoman, is everything okay? Did I do something wrong? And Ava Sinclair, sitting in the chairman's seat of the company she had bought for $2.4 billion, looked at the 23-year-old security guard making $14 an hour. And she smiled, the first true smile of the entire morning. "No, David," she said. "You did something right. This morning you were the only person in this entire building who did. And I brought you up here so that these 6 people on their way out could watch me thank the one person they'd have stepped over without a second glance." She gestured to the security team. "Please escort the former executives out of the building. They're to collect nothing. Their offices will be boxed and couriered, effective immediately." The security guards moved down the row. Gary Pruitt rose on shaking legs. Diane Holloway rose with her chin still stubbornly high but her eyes wet. Marcus Reed could barely stand. Jonathan Pierce moved like a man in a dream. Sandra Kowalski had to be helped up, still weeping. And Richard Vance, last of all, stood for a long moment, staring at Ava. And whatever he wanted to say, he could not find it, and in the end he said nothing at all. And he turned and he walked out of the boardroom he had ruled for 11 years. Past a 23-year-old guard he had never once bothered to learn the name of, and out into a future that had ended an hour ago, the moment he decided a woman in a plain gray coat was not worth the trouble of a single question. And when the doors had closed behind them and only the board remained, Bill Hargrove let out a long breath and looked at the woman at the head of the table. "Chairwoman Sinclair," he said, "in 40 years in this business I have never seen anything like what just happened in this room." Ava Sinclair closed her portfolio. She looked at David Miller still standing there bewildered by the door. She looked at the 11 directors watching her, and she thought about her mother on her knees at night in a building just like this one. "Bill," she said quietly, "we're only getting started. We're only getting started." The words hung in the boardroom air, and Bill Hargrove nodded slowly, and around the enormous table, the 11 directors of Whitman Financial understood each in their own way that the woman in the plain gray coat had not come merely to fire 6 people. She had come to take the building apart down to its foundations and see what had been rotting underneath. "David," Ava said, turning to the young guard still hovering by the door, "before you go back down, what's your last name?" "Miller, ma'am. David Miller." "How long have you worked here, David?" 14 months, chairwoman." "And in 14 months," Ava said, "have you ever seen a morning like this one? Not the ending, the beginning. A guest treated the way I was treated in that lobby." David Miller hesitated, and Ava watched the war happen on his face, the same war she had watched happen on the faces of 100 honest people who worked for powerful men. Tell the truth and risk everything. Lie and keep your $14 an hour. She saw him decide. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly, "more than once." The room stilled. "Tell me," Ava said. "There was a woman about 3 months back. Came in for a job interview. Cleaning staff night shift. She was Latina, older, didn't speak a lot of English. Mr. Pruitt, he told her the service entrance was around the back, and she shouldn't have come in the front, where clients could see her. Made her walk all the way around the building in the rain." David's jaw tightened. "She was crying when she came in the back. I gave her a paper towel. She got the job, I think. But I never forgot her face." "Thank you, David," Ava said, and her voice had gone very soft. "You can go back down now, but I want you to keep your phone close today. Someone from my office is going to call you before the day is out, and I promise you it's good news. Go on." David Miller left, still not quite understanding what had happened to his life, and the moment the door closed, Ava turned back to the board, and the softness was gone. "Bill," she said, "that young man just told me without being asked, without any protection, that this was a pattern. A $14 an hour guard was braver than 6 executives making 7 figures. I want you to sit with that for a moment, all of you, because it tells you everything about who's been running this company and who's actually been holding it together." It was 11:52 now, and one of the directors, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who had said nothing all morning, leaned forward. "Chairwoman Sinclair," Patricia said, "I have to ask, and I ask it as someone who voted to approve the sale. The 6 people you just removed ran the largest divisions in this company: sales operations, finance, legal, HR, and the CEO himself. You've decapitated Whitman Financial in the space of 1 hour. The markets open in 18 minutes. What exactly is your plan? And this was the question Ava had been waiting for, because it was the right question, the one a serious person asks, and she respected Patricia Okonkwo for asking it. "My plan," Ava said, "is that I never do anything without knowing exactly what comes next. Thomas." Thomas Wu touched his tablet, and the screen changed again, and now it showed 6 names, 6 photographs, 6 brief biographies. 3 weeks ago, Ava said, "The moment the acquisition cleared its final regulatory hurdle, I began quietly assembling an interim leadership team. 6 people, every one of them vetted, briefed, and under contract as of yesterday afternoon. They are at this moment sitting in a conference room 4 floors down, waiting for my call. A new interim CEO, a new COO, a new CFO, a new general counsel, a new head of HR, and a new head of sales." She let that sink in. "I did not decapitate this company, Patricia. I performed surgery. The new heads were ready before the old ones ever knew they were sick. Every division will have leadership before the closing bell. Sami." Patricia Okonkwo sat back and something like a smile touched the corner of her mouth. "You planned all of this." "I plan everything," Ava said. "I learned a long time ago that the world does not hand justice to people who wing it." The twist rippled around the table because they understood now that the humiliation in the lobby, the footage, the terminations, none of it had been improvised, none of it had been emotional. It had been a campaign planned to the minute, and the woman running it had walked into that lobby already knowing she would walk out, having remade the company by lunchtime. "But there's something else," Ava said, and her voice dropped. "And this is the part I want the board to hear before it hears anything else, because it's the part that's going to keep some of us up at night." She nodded to Thomas. "Show them the client accounts." The screen changed, and now it was numbers, dense columns of them, and Ava watched several of the directors lean in and then one by one go pale. During due diligence, Ava said, "My forensic team didn't just look at the HR files. They looked at the money. Because in my experience, a company that treats people like they don't matter usually treats their money the same way. And they found something." She pointed at the screen. "Do you see this cluster of accounts, 206 of them? What do they have in common, Bill? Look closely." Bill Hargrove studied the screen and his face changed. They're all in lower income zip codes," he said slowly, "mostly minority neighborhoods." "Every single one," Ava said. 206 client accounts concentrated in exactly the communities this company apparently decided didn't matter, and every single one of them was charged fees. Advisory fees, maintenance fees, restructuring fees that no comparable account in a wealthier zip code was ever charged. On average, these clients paid 40% more for the identical services. Some of them paid double. The boardroom had gone deathly quiet. "For how long?" Patricia Okonkwo asked, and her voice had an edge now. "At least 6 years," Ava said, "which is as far back as the digital records go. The total, and my team is still counting, is somewhere north of $30 million, skimmed quietly from the people least able to afford it and least likely to have a lawyer who'd notice." She let the number land. "And here's the part that turns my stomach. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a software glitch. Someone designed it. Someone built the fee structure this way on purpose, and then buried it deep enough that it took a forensic team 3 weeks to dig it out." "Who?" Bill Hargrove demanded. "Who designed it?" Ava looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I have a theory, and I'm going to find out today, because whoever it was is either one of the 6 people my security team is walking out of this building right now, or, and this is what keeps me up at night, it's someone still sitting in this company, maybe even someone in this room." The temperature in the boardroom dropped 10 degrees, because that was the accusation nobody had expected, and Ava watched it move around the table, watched 11 directors suddenly wonder about each other, watched old alliances flicker with new suspicion. She had done it deliberately. She wanted them uncertain. An uncertain board could not close ranks against her, and a board that suspected one of its own would help her find the truth rather than bury it. It was 12:04 now. The markets had opened. And Ava Sinclair stood at the head of the table of a company that had, in a single morning, lost its entire senior leadership and discovered a $30 million fraud aimed at its poorest clients. "Here's what happens next," Ava said. Thomas is going to bring up the interim team. They'll be sworn in and briefed within the hour. Patricia, I want you to chair an emergency oversight committee, 3 directors to work directly with my forensic team on the fee scandal. I chose you because you asked the hardest question in this room, and people who ask hard questions are the people I trust with hard answers. Patricia nodded, and Ava saw that she had just made an ally for life. Bill, I want you to personally oversee outreach to all 206 affected clients. Full refunds with interest and a written apology signed by me before the end of the month. That's chairwoman that's going to cost, one of the directors began. I know exactly what it's going to cost, Ava cut in. It's going to cost $30 million plus interest, and it's going to be the best money this company ever spent because it's the price of being able to look at ourselves in the mirror. If anyone at this table has a problem with refunding money we stole from working people, I'd like to hear it now out loud on the record. No one said a word. Good, Ava said. And then at 12:09, the boardroom doors opened without a knock, and everyone turned and a man in an expensive suit walked in, unannounced, uninvited, with the confident stride of someone who had never in his life waited to be summoned. He was perhaps 50, silver-haired, with the deep tan of a man who spent his winters somewhere warm, and he looked around the table with an easy smile. Well, he said, I heard there was some excitement up here this morning. Thought I'd come see for myself. He extended his hand toward Ava. Warren Sterling. I don't believe we've had the pleasure. I'm the founder of this company. Or I was before before Sterling Horizon came along. He chuckled. Funny thing, the name. Sterling Horizon. Sterling, you didn't name your firm after me, did you, little joke? Ava did not take his hand. Warren Sterling, she repeated slowly. You founded Whitman Financial 31 years ago. You stepped down as CEO 11 years ago when Richard Vance took over. You retain a 9% ownership stake and a permanent seat on the board, which you almost never attend. She tilted her head. And no, Mr. Sterling, I did not name my firm after you. I'd never heard of you when I named it. I named it after the horizon my mother used to point at through the window of the offices she cleaned, when she told me that someday I'd own everything the light touched. Warren Sterling's smile flickered just slightly. Charming story, he said, lowering his unshaken hand. But I'm here on business. You've just fired my entire executive team. Publicly, humiliatingly, including a CEO I personally hired and mentored. And I've been on the phone all morning with several members of this board who are, let's say, concerned about the recklessness of it. His eyes moved around the table, and Ava watched 2 of the directors avoid his gaze, and she filed that away. You're new to this world, Ms. Sinclair. You made your money in, what was it, algorithmic trading, fast money, clever money. But running an institution like this one takes a steadier hand. A hand that understands you don't blow up 30 years of relationships over one bad morning in a lobby. And there it was, the real opposition. Not 6 ruined executives being walked out the door, but the man who had built the whole machine, the founder, the patriarch, the one with a permanent seat and a phone full of loyal directors. And Ava understood in an instant that Warren Sterling was the most dangerous person she had faced all day. Mr. Sterling, she said pleasantly, since you brought up bad mornings, I have a question for you, and I'd like the board to hear the answer. By all means. 6 years ago, Ava said someone in this company designed a fee structure that overcharged 206 clients in low-income, mostly minority neighborhoods by an average of 40%. $30 million skimmed from working people over 6 years. It was buried deep, deliberately. It took my forensic team 3 weeks to find it. She held his eyes. 6 years ago, Mr. Sterling, you were still chairman of the board, before you handed that seat to Richard Vance. Do you happen to know anything about a special fee initiative approved around that time? The room went silent as a tomb, and Ava watched it happen, watched the easy confidence drain out of Warren Sterling's tanned face, watched his jaw tighten and his eyes go flat and cold. And in that single, unguarded second, before he could rearrange his features back into a smile, Ava Sinclair knew. She had her answer. I have no idea what you're talking about. Warren Sterling said, but he said it half a beat too late, and everyone in the room heard the lie in the timing. That's interesting, Ava said softly, because I never said it was approved by the board. I said someone designed it, but you just reached immediately for the word approved, as though you were already thinking about who signed off on it. She took a step toward him. Thomas, the initiative documents, the ones with the signatures. Warren Sterling moved faster than a man his age should have been able to. Now hold on, he said, and his voice had lost its silk. You are not going to stand there and accuse me in front of my own board of some fantasy your forensic accountants dreamed up to justify a $2.4 billion power grab. I built this company from nothing. Nothing before you were out of grade school. You were overcharging poor people, Ava said, and calling it business. You have no proof. And that was Warren Sterling's mistake, the same mistake his executives had made in the lobby, the mistake of a man so used to being the most powerful person in every room that he had forgotten a simple thing. Ava Sinclair never, ever walked into a room without proof. Thomas, she said without breaking eye contact with Sterling, play it. The screen filled with a document. An internal memo 6 years old titled Tiered Regional Fee Optimization, and at the bottom in blue ink, scanned and enlarged so that every stroke was visible to every person in the room, was a signature. Warren Sterling. Optimization. Ava read aloud. That's the word you chose. Optimization. For a plan to charge a widow in the South Bronx double what you'd charge a hedge fund manager on Park Avenue for the exact same service. She turned to the board. This is the founder. This is the man who just walked in here to lecture me about steady hands and 30 years of relationships. And this is his signature on the single most cynical document I have ever seen in 20 years in finance. Bill Hargrove was staring at the screen, and his hands were flat on the table, and his voice when it came was hoarse. Warren, tell me that's not real. Tell me that's a forgery. I've known you 30 years. Tell me you didn't do this. Warren Sterling looked at the screen. He looked at the board. He looked at Ava. And Ava watched the last 30 years of a man's reputation crumble. In real time, watched him understand that there was no phone call he could make, no director he could lean on, no version of this where the silk came back. You don't understand this business, he said finally, and his voice had gone quiet and bitter. Those accounts were high risk, high touch, high cost to service. The fees reflected who you thought you could get away with cheating, Ava said. Don't dress it up, not now, not with that memo on the screen. It was legal, Sterling snapped. It was disclosed. Buried in the fine print, yes, but disclosed. My lawyers signed off. You can't touch me for it. And Ava Sinclair smiled, and it was the coldest smile of the entire day. You're probably right, she said. About the legal part. Buried disclosures, technical compliance, your lawyers were clever, I'm sure. You might well beat it in court. She paused. But you forgot something, Mr. Sterling. You forgot the same thing your CEO forgot in the lobby this morning. You forgot who owns the building now. She turned to the board. Warren Sterling holds a 9% stake and a permanent board seat, both granted under the company's original founding charter. She looked at Thomas. Thomas, what does the founding charter say about the permanent seat? It says, Thomas read, that the permanent board seat is guaranteed to the founder in perpetuity and may be revoked only by unanimous vote of all other sitting directors in the event of conduct materially harmful to the company or its clients. Conduct materially harmful to its clients, Ava repeated. She looked around the table at the 11 directors, at Bill Hargrove, who had known this man for 30 years, at Patricia Okonkwo, who had asked the hardest question at the two who had avoided Sterling's eyes. I believe defrauding 206 clients of $30 million qualifies. I'm calling for a vote, right now, to revoke Warren Sterling's permanent seat and refer his conduct to federal regulators. All those in favor? You can't do this, Warren Sterling said, and there was panic in it now, real panic, the panic of a man watching the ground he had stood on for 3 decades dissolve beneath his feet. Bill, we go back 30 years. You were at my wedding, both my weddings. You are not going to sit there and... All those in favor, Ava said again quietly. And Bill Hargrove, 30-year friend wedding guest, closed his eyes for one long moment, and then he raised his hand. "In favor," Bill said, and his voice broke on the words. Patricia Okonkwo raised her hand. "In favor." One by one around the table the hands went up. Even the two who had avoided Sterling's gaze once they saw which way the room was turning raised their hands, because that is how it always goes with men like Warren Sterling. The loyalty lasts exactly as long as the power does. 10 hands, 11. Unanimous. "The seat is revoked," Ava said. "Effective immediately. Mr. Sterling, your 9% stake is yours to keep. The law protects that. But your voice in this company is finished, and the memo, along with everything my forensic team has assembled, goes to the SEC and the Department of Justice before the end of the week." She nodded toward the door where the security team had quietly reappeared. "These gentlemen will show you out, the same way they showed out the men you trained to think like you." Warren Sterling stood frozen for a moment, this titan, this founder, this builder of empires, and then something in him seemed to collapse from the inside, and he turned without another word and walked toward the door on legs that had suddenly become an old man's legs. But at the threshold, he stopped, and he turned back, and he looked at Ava Sinclair, sitting in the chairman's seat of the company he had built from nothing. And for the first time all day, he looked at her. Really looked at her, the way not one person in that lobby had looked at her that morning. "Who are you?" he asked, and it was not a threat now, and it was not contempt. It was something almost like wonder. "Where do you even come from?" And Ava. Sinclair looked back at him, and she thought about her mother on her knees at night in a building just like this one, and she gave him the truest answer she had. "I come from the people you overcharged," she said. "I come from the night shift. I come from the service entrance around the back in the rain. You spent 30 years walking past women like my mother without ever once seeing them." She paused. "You should have looked, Mr. Sterling. You never know which one of them is raising the woman who's going to buy your building." Warren Sterling had no answer for that. There was no answer for that. And he turned, and the security guards walked him out, and the doors closed behind the founder of Whitman Financial for the last time. It was 12:31, and the boardroom sat in stunned, exhausted silence. 11 directors who had watched their entire world get rebuilt in the space of a single morning by a woman none of them had known existed 24 hours ago. Bill Hargrove was the one who finally spoke. He looked down the table at Ava, and there were tears standing in the old man's eyes. Tears of shame, Ava thought, and maybe of relief. "I raised my hand," he said quietly. "Against Warren, 30 years, and I raised my hand. Do you know why?" "Tell me," Ava said. "Because you were right about the mirror." Bill wiped his eyes with the back of one weathered hand, not caring who saw. "I've been on this board for 11 years. 11 years, chairwoman. And in all that time, I never once asked to see the fee structures on the low-income accounts. Never once asked why our turnover was so high in the service divisions. Never once asked why every complaint seemed to just disappear." His voice broke. "I didn't design any of it, but I sat right here in this room and I let it happen because it was easier not to look. You put a mirror up in front of 6 people in that lobby this morning, but you put one up in front of all of us too, and I don't like what I see." The room was silent. "Then help me fix it," Ava said, and her voice was gentle now. "That's all any of this is for Bill. I didn't buy this company to punish people. I bought it because when my forensic team showed me those 206 accounts, I saw my mother's face on every single one of them. And I decided that for once, just once, the person walking into the building nobody respected was going to be the person who owned it." She stood, and she pressed her hands flat on the great table. 6 people are gone. A founder is gone. But that's not the victory. Firing people is easy. The victory is what we build in their place. And that starts now this afternoon with all of you in this room deciding whether you want to be part of it or whether you want to follow Warren Sterling out that door. She looked around the table, meeting every eye. "So I'll ask each of you the same question one at a time, and I want to hear your answer out loud on the record. Are you with me or are you not, Bill? We'll start with you." And Bill Hargrove, 30-year veteran, wiped his eyes one more time, and he sat up straight, and he looked the new chairwoman of Whitman Financial dead in the eye. "I'm with you," he said. "God help me, I should have done this myself years ago. I'm with you, chairwoman." Patricia Okonkwo did not hesitate for even a second. "With you." And around the table it went, one voice at a time, 11 voices, each one saying the words out loud, each one binding themselves to the woman in the plain gray coat, until the last hand had been counted and the last voice had spoken, and Ava Sinclair stood at the head of a table that was for the first time in its long and rotten history entirely unanimously hers. She sat back down in the chairman's seat. She opened her portfolio, and she looked at the clock on the wall, which read 12:39, 1 hour and 54 minutes since a woman in a $40 coat had walked through a revolving door into a lobby full of people who could not be bothered to learn her name. "All right," Ava said quietly, and she picked up her pen. "Let's get to work." Sao Ngan về. Bạn nói đúng, phần này ngắn hơn yêu cầu. Để tôi viết bổ sung nối liền mạch ngay từ chỗ kết thúc để đủ độ dài 6.000 đến 6.502. Let's get to work. Ava picked up her pen, but before it touched the page, the boardroom doors opened again, and Thomas came back in, and the look on his face told Ava that the morning was not finished with her yet. "Chairwoman," Thomas said quietly, leaning close so only she could hear. "There's a situation downstairs. The 6 executives. They're not leaving quietly." "What do you mean, not leaving quietly?" "Richard Vance, he's in the lobby. He's refusing to hand over his building credentials, and he's making a scene. Reporters are starting to gather outside. Someone tipped off the financial press. There are 3 camera crews on the sidewalk already, and more coming." Ava set down her pen. She looked around the table at the 11 directors who had gone quiet again, sensing the shift. "How did the press find out about a private personnel matter within 2 hours?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "We think," Thomas said carefully, "that Mr. Sterling made some calls on his way down." And there it was. Warren Sterling walked out the door, stripped of his seat, had reached for the only weapon he had left. If he could not control the company from the inside, he would burn it from the outside in the press before Ava could tell the story herself. It was the move of a cornered man, and it was, Ava had to admit, a smart one. 12:43, 2 hours and 11 minutes since she had walked in. "Bill," Ava said, standing. "Patricia, come with me. The rest of you stay here. Thomas will bring the interim team up in 20 minutes, and you'll begin the briefings. I need to go handle the lobby before it handles us." "Chairwoman," Patricia said, rising quickly. "With respect, walking into a media firefight 2 hours into ownership is a risk. One wrong word on camera, and Sterling's version becomes the story. Maybe we should prepare a statement first. Get communications involved. Do this carefully." Ava considered her for a moment, and she liked Patricia Okonkwo more with every passing minute. "You're right that it's a risk," Ava said, "but you're wrong about the strategy. Sterling wants me to hide. He wants me holed up here drafting careful statements while he tells every reporter on that sidewalk that a reckless outsider destroyed a beloved institution on a whim. The longer I stay silent, the truer his version becomes." She was already moving toward the door. The only way to beat a lie that's already running is to catch it with the truth before it reaches the finish line. "I'm not going to hide from those cameras, Patricia. I'm going to walk straight into them." The elevator ride down was silent, the 3 of them descending toward whatever waited in the lobby, and Ava used the time the way she used all her time, thinking 3 moves ahead. She knew what Richard Vance was. She had spent 45 minutes studying him that morning. He was a man who believed right down to his bones that the world owed him deference, and men like that, when the deference was taken away, did not go quiet. They got loud. They got desperate. And desperate men, in front of cameras, made mistakes. The elevator opened onto the lobby, and it was chaos. Richard Vance stood in the middle of the marble floor, exactly where he had stood 2 hours earlier when he called Ava a thief and shoved her toward the doors, and now he was surrounded by a cluster of reporters, his face red, his tie loosened his voice, carrying across the whole space. The other 5 executives hovered near the walls, some of them clearly wanting to leave, some of them drawn to Richard's performance like moths. And through the tall glass front of the building, Ava could see the camera crews on the sidewalk lenses trained inward, waiting. An absolute disgrace. Richard was saying to the reporters. 11 years I ran this company, grew it, protected it, and then this outsider walks in, this stunt artist, and stages some kind of theatrical ambush, fires the entire leadership team on nothing but a personal grudge, and now she's going to run Whitman Financial into the ground. The clients should be terrified. The employees should be terrified. This is not justice. This is a hostile takeover dressed up as Mr. Vance. Ava's voice cut across the lobby, not loud but clear, and every head turned. The reporters spun. The cameras outside pressed against the glass, and Richard Vance, mid-sentence, went silent because the woman he was describing as a stunt artist and an outsider was walking calmly across the marble toward him, and she did not look like a woman running from anything. "You want to have this conversation in front of the press," Ava said, stopping a few feet from him. "All right. Let's have it in front of the press, but let's have all of it, not just your half." A reporter thrust a microphone toward her. "Are you Ava Sinclair? The new owner, Mr. Vance, is alleging you fired the entire executive team without cause. Is that true?" "My name is Ava Sinclair," she said, turning to face the cameras, directly calm as still water. "I'm the chairwoman of Whitman Financial as of 9 o'clock this morning, and no, it's not true. I fired 6 executives for very specific, very documented cause. Mr. Vance would prefer you didn't ask what that cause was. So let me tell you. This morning at 10:15, I walked into this lobby dressed exactly as an ordinary person to see how this company treats people it believes to be nobody. Over the next 45 minutes, these 6 executives took turns humiliating me. They called me homeless. They asked if I spoke English. They threatened to have me arrested. And Mr. Vance here," she turned to look at him, "physically grabbed me by the collar of my coat and shoved me toward those doors in front of dozens of witnesses while calling me a thief. The lobby went silent. A reporter's pen stopped moving. "That's a lie," Richard said, but his voice had gone thin. "That's a complete—" "It's on camera," Ava said simply. "Every second of it. The security footage from this exact lobby. I've already shown it to the board. I'm happy to release it to all of you in full, unedited, time-stamped." She looked at the reporters. "You be the judge of whether it was a personal grudge or documented cause. I have nothing to hide. Mr. Vance is the one who doesn't want you to see the tape. Ask yourself why a man would fight this hard to keep you from seeing something if he'd done nothing wrong." And that was the moment the story turned, and Ava felt it turn the way you feel the wind change before a storm. The reporters who had walked in ready to write about a reckless billionaire destroying an institution now smelled something far bigger, and they turned as one toward Richard Vance. "Mr. Vance, is there security footage? Mr. Vance, did you physically grab Ms. Sinclair? Mr. Vance, will you consent to the release of the tape?" Richard Vance stood in the middle of the marble floor, surrounded, cornered, and Ava watched him do the calculation, watched him realize that every word he said now was being recorded, that the tape existed, whether he liked it or not, that the more he denied it, the worse it would look when it came out. And she watched the fight go out of him, inch by inch, the same way it had gone out of him upstairs. "I have no comment," he said finally, and turned away, and the reporters descended on him anyway, and he pushed through them toward the doors, and this time nobody stopped him. And the last Ava saw of Richard Vance was his back disappearing through the revolving door into a scrum of cameras, a man who had walked into his lobby that morning as the CEO of a company and was walking out of it 2 hours later as a headline, 12:56. Ava turned back to the remaining reporters. "You'll all receive the full footage, the documentation on the fee scandal I'm about to describe, and a written statement from me within the hour. But since you're here, let me give you the real story, the one that actually matters, the one that isn't about 6 executives and a lobby." She drew a breath. "This company has been overcharging its poorest clients for at least 6 years. 206 accounts, concentrated in low-income and minority neighborhoods, charged an average of 40% more than wealthy clients for identical services, more than $30 million taken from working people. That's the story. The lobby this morning was just a symptom. The fee scandal is the disease. And I am going to spend every day of my ownership of this company curing it, starting with full refunds, with interest to all 206 families, and a referral of the entire matter to federal regulators. The reporters were writing furiously now, and Ava knew that by the evening news the story would not be reckless billionaire fires beloved executives. It would be new owner uncovers massive fraud against poor clients. She had caught the lie before it reached the finish line exactly as she said she would. Patricia Okonkwo, standing just behind her, murmured, "I take back what I said upstairs. That was the right call." "You weren't wrong to question it," Ava said quietly. "Question everything I do, Patricia. It's why I'm keeping you close. The day everyone in this company stops questioning the person in charge is the day it starts rotting again." She was about to turn back toward the elevators when a small voice stopped her. "Chairwoman Sinclair." She turned. It was the young receptionist, Chelsea, the one who had checked the system twice that morning and told Ava she didn't belong, the one who had called for security, the one who had said honestly, "If you don't have an appointment, there's not much I can do for you." And now Chelsea stood behind her desk with her face pale and her hands shaking, and Ava understood that this young woman had spent the last 2 hours watching her entire career flash before her eyes. "Chelsea," Ava said. "That's right, isn't it, Chelsea?" "Yes, ma'am." The young woman's voice trembled. I just wanted to say, I know I turned you away this morning. I told you there was nothing I could do, and I understand if I'm fired too. I saw what happened to everyone else, and I couldn't stand not knowing, so I wanted to come say it myself. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. And here was a choice, and Ava knew the whole lobby was watching and the reporters were watching, and it would have been easy, so easy to make an example of the receptionist too, to let the terror roll all the way down to the bottom. But Ava thought about her mother and about the difference between the people who built cruelty and the people who were simply caught inside it, and she made her choice. "Chelsea," she said gently, "look at me. Did you call me homeless?" "No, ma'am." "Did you ask if I spoke English? Did you threaten to have me arrested? Did you mock my coat or my intelligence or grab me by the collar?" "No, ma'am." Tears were running down Chelsea's face now. "But I turned you away. I said there was nothing I could do." "You told me there was nothing you could do," Ava said, "because the system told you I wasn't in it, and every executive in this building reinforced that 100 times an hour. You were doing your job the way this company trained you to do it. That's not the same as what those 6 people did. Those 6 had power, and they used it to grind down a person they thought was helpless. You had a computer screen and a policy, and no power at all." She stepped closer to the desk. "So no, you're not fired, but I am going to ask you to do something." "Anything," Chelsea whispered. "The next time someone walks into this lobby who doesn't look like they belong, who isn't in the system, who's wearing the wrong coat, I want you to be the one person who treats them like a human being anyway. I want you to ask their name. I want you to offer them a chair and a glass of water and a phone call upstairs. Because you're the first face everyone sees when they walk through that door, Chelsea. You're not powerless. You never were. You're the front line of what this company is. Do you understand?" Chelsea nodded, unable to speak, wiping her eyes. "Good," Ava said. "Then we understand each other. Now sit down before you fall down. You've had a hard morning too." And a strange thing happened, then something Ava had not planned and could not have scripted. A soft sound rippled across the lobby, and Ava realized it was applause. Not the executives who were gone or leaving, the ordinary employees, the ones who had crossed that marble floor all morning and looked away ashamed, powerless, watching. They were clapping now quietly at first, and then louder, and Ava understood that they were not clapping for the firings or the drama or the takeover. They were clapping because someone had finally told the receptionist she was a human being with power, and in doing so had told all of them the same thing. 1 o'clock, 2 hours and 30 minutes. Ava let the applause wash over her for exactly 3 seconds, and then she raised a hand gently and it quieted. "I'm not going to give a speech," she said to the lobby full of employees. "I've done enough talking this morning, but I want to say one thing to the people who actually keep this building running. The security guards, the receptionists, the cleaning staff who come in at night after all of you have gone home." Her voice caught just slightly, and she let it. "I know you. I know exactly who you are because I was raised by you. And I promise you, all of you, that as long as I sit at the head of the table in this building, no one who walks through that door will ever again be treated like they don't matter. That's not a policy. That's a promise. And I keep my promises." She turned to go, and then she stopped, and she looked back one more time, and she found the face she was looking for. David Miller standing at his post by the door, watching her with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life. "David," she called across the lobby. "Ma'am, when your shift ends today, I want you to come up to the 44th floor, not to work, to talk, because a man who does the right thing when he thinks nobody important is watching is exactly the kind of man this company has been missing at the top, and I've got some ideas about that." David Miller's mouth fell open and the lobby rippled with quiet astonishment, and Ava turned and walked back toward the elevators with Bill and Patricia at her side, leaving behind a lobby that was for the first time in its history full of people who had just watched the invisible become powerful. In the elevator going back up, Bill Hargrove let out a long, shaky breath. "You just promoted a security guard to the executive floor in front of the entire company," he said. "You know that, right? That's going to get out. That's going to be a story, too." "Good," Ava said. "Let it be a story. Let every $14 an hour worker in this country read about David Miller and understand that decency is worth more than a title. That's the only kind of story I care about being in." Patricia Okonkwo studied her in the reflection of the elevator doors. "You planned the terminations. You planned the interim team. You planned the fee investigation. Did you plan any of that down there? The receptionist, the guard, the applause." Ava was quiet for a moment. "No," she admitted. "Some things you can't plan. Some things you just have to feel your way through in the moment and hope you land on the right side of them." She watched the numbers climb. "My mother used to say that a plan gets you to the door, but what you do once you're inside when everybody's watching and there's no script left, that's the part that tells the world who you really are." The elevator chimed. 44. "I've been planning for this door my whole life, Patricia. Now I get to find out who I really am on the other side of it." The doors opened onto the executive floor, and Ava Sinclair stepped out, and Bill and Patricia followed, and somewhere 4 floors below, 6 ruined executives were scattering into the noon light of a city that no longer belonged to them, and a founder was making frantic phone calls that no one would return, and a young security guard was staring at an elevator he had just been invited to ride, and a receptionist was learning for the first time in her life that she had never been powerless at all. 1:04 in the afternoon. 2 hours and 34 minutes since a woman in a $40 coat had walked through a revolving door, and she was only getting started. And she was only getting started. But the afternoon had a way of testing that kind of confidence, and it did not take long to begin. The interim team was waiting on the 44th floor, exactly as Thomas had promised, 6 professionals in a glass-walled conference room, and Ava had chosen every one of them with the same care she brought to everything. But before she could reach them, Thomas intercepted her in the hallway with his phone held out, and his expression had gone tight again. "Chairwoman, it's already moving faster than we expected. Sterling didn't just call the press, he filed something." Ava stopped walking. "Filed what?" "An emergency motion, 20 minutes ago. He's petitioning a state court for a temporary restraining order to freeze the change in control, claiming the acquisition was executed under, and I'm quoting his filing, materially fraudulent representations. He's asking a judge to put you on ice and reinstate the old board pending review." Thomas swallowed. "There's a hearing this afternoon, 3:30. If he wins, you're locked out of your own company by dinner." 1:09, 2 hours and 39 minutes. And there it was. The counterpunch. The reason a man like Warren Sterling was more dangerous walked out the door than sitting at the table, because a cornered predator does not simply leave. Ava felt the cold clarity settle over her, the same clarity that had carried her through the lobby that morning, the same clarity her mother had taught her on all those long nights. Panic, her mother used to say, is a luxury for people who have somewhere else to be. "You and me, baby, we've got nowhere else. So we don't panic, we just think." "Get me our litigation team on the phone," Ava said. "Not the Whitman legal department, they're compromised, half of them reported to Pierce. My people, Sterling Horizons outside counsel. I want them at that hearing at 3:30, and I want to be there in person." In person. Bill Hargrove had caught up to them, breathing hard. "Chairwoman principals don't attend TRO hearings. That's what lawyers are for. If you sit in that courtroom, you're exposed. Sterling's attorneys will try to provoke you, get you on the record saying something reckless. Let them try, Ava said. Bill, I've spent 2 hours today watching people underestimate me. Warren Sterling is about to make the same mistake in a courtroom that his executives made in a lobby. He thinks I'm an outsider who got lucky with a takeover. He thinks I'll fold when a judge frowns at me. He has no idea who he's dealing with, and I intend to keep it that way until exactly the moment it's too late for him to recover. She turned to Thomas. But first, the interim team. They get sworn in and briefed before I go anywhere. This company does not sit leaderless for 1 minute, TRO or no TRO. Sterling wants chaos. We give him order. She walked into the glass conference room and 6 people stood, and Ava spent the next 40 minutes doing the unglamorous work that Nikto ever puts in a news story, the work of actually running a company, going division by division, making sure each new leader understood not just their job, but the culture Ava intended to build. She moved fast, decisively, and the interim team watched their new chairwoman with growing respect. Because it was one thing to fire people dramatically in a boardroom, and quite another to be able to explain cold exactly how the sales division's incentive structure had rewarded the very behavior that had produced Gary Pruitt. But even as she worked, part of her mind stayed on the clock and on the courtroom and on Warren Sterling. 1:52. She wrapped the briefing. You all have your mandates, she said, standing. I have to be in court at 3:30 defending our right to be in this building at all. If Sterling wins this afternoon, everything we just discussed evaporates. So I need you to understand this isn't ceremonial. Everything is on the line today. Run your divisions like it. I'll be back before the closing bell one way or another. And she left them there, 6 people she had known for less than an hour, holding a company that might not be hers by nightfall. In the car to the courthouse, Ava's phone rang, and it was a number she did not recognize, and something told her to answer it. Ms. Sinclair. The voice was female, older, careful. You don't know me. My name is Elena Vasquez. I saw the news a few minutes ago, about the fees, about the 206 accounts. A pause, and Ava heard the woman gather herself. I'm one of them. I've been a client of Whitman for 9 years, and 3 years ago I asked a man in that building why my fees were so much higher than my sister-in-law's, and he told me it was because my account was, quote, higher maintenance. I never understood what that meant. I do now. Ava closed her eyes. Mrs. Vasquez, I'm so sorry. The man I spoke to, Elena Vasquez said. I remembered his name because he was so unkind about it. I wrote it down that night. I was so upset. I still have the paper. Another pause. His name was Vance, Richard Vance, and Ms. Sinclair. He told me something else that day. He said, and I've never forgotten it, he said, Mrs. Vasquez, people like you should be grateful we let you bank here at all. 2:04. And in the back of the car, Ava Sinclair felt something go very still and very cold inside her, because that changed everything. Warren Sterling had signed the memo 6 years ago, but if Richard Vance had personally administered the discriminatory fees, personally spoken to clients that way, personally enforced the policy after taking over as CEO, then this was not one man's old sin. It was a living, breathing conspiracy that had continued right up until this morning. And it meant the fraud was not merely something to refer to regulators. It was something a court would care about today in a way that would blow Sterling's restraining order to pieces. Mrs. Vasquez, Ava said slowly, that paper you wrote his name on, would you be willing to tell what you just told me to a lawyer under oath if it came to it? Miss Sinclair, Elena Vasquez said, and her voice hardened into something like steel. I have been waiting 9 years for someone to ask me that question. Ava got Thomas on the line before she'd even hung up with Elena. Thomas, I need you to do 3 things in the next hour. First, find every client from those 206 accounts who ever filed a complaint or made a note about who they spoke to. Cross-reference it against Richard Vance's name. Second, get Elena Vasquez connected to our litigation team immediately. She's a witness and she's willing. Third, Ava paused. Pull the phone logs and the email records for Richard Vance going back 6 years. If he administered these fees personally, there's a trail. Find it before 3:30. That's a lot in 90 minutes, chairwoman. Then it's a good thing, Ava said, that I hired people who are better than the ones I fired. 2:19. The car pulled up to the courthouse, and the press was there too, of course, and Ava walked through them without a word, her face calm, her plain coat traded now for a dark suit that Thomas had sent ahead, because there was a time for the $40 coat, and there was a time to look like exactly what she was, and a courtroom was the second kind of time. Inside at the plaintiff's table sat Warren Sterling, and beside him a phalanx of expensive lawyers. And when Ava walked in, he turned and looked at her, and the easy confidence was back on his tanned face, the confidence of a man who believed he had found the lever that would undo his morning's defeat. "Ava Sinclair," he said quietly as she passed, "you should have taken my hand this morning when I offered it. This could have been civilized. Now it's going to be a bloodbath, and it's going to be yours." Ava stopped. She looked at him, and she smiled. "You know what's interesting, Warren," she said softly. "You still haven't asked the right question, just like your executives this morning. You're so sure you know what cards I'm holding that you haven't stopped to wonder what I might have picked up on the way over here." She let that sit for exactly one beat, watching the first flicker of uncertainty cross his face, and then she walked onto her own table and sat down. The judge entered at 3:32. Her name was the Honorable Margaret Chen, and she had the weary, unimpressible expression of a jurist who had seen every kind of corporate knife fight there was to see. She looked over the filing, and she looked at the crowd of lawyers, and she sighed. "Mr. Sterling's counsel, you're asking me to freeze a $2.4 billion transaction that closed lawfully this morning on the grounds of what was it materially fraudulent representations. That's a serious claim. You'd better have serious support for it. Go ahead." Sterling's lead attorney rose smooth and polished. "Your Honor, Ms. Sinclair and Sterling Horizon represented to the board and to regulators that this was a clean arm's-length acquisition. What they concealed is that Ms. Sinclair's true intention was never to operate Whitman Financial as a going concern, but to stage a personal vendetta. Within 2 hours of closing, she had fired the entire senior leadership, publicly humiliated them, forced out the founder, and thrown the company into chaos that has already begun destroying shareholder value. This was not an acquisition, Your Honor. It was an ambush planned in advance, and the board approved it under a false understanding of her intentions. We ask the court to freeze the transaction and restore stability pending a full review." It was a good argument. Ava had to give him that. It was clean, it was plausible, and it painted her exactly as Sterling wanted her, painted a vindictive outsider who had lied her way into control to satisfy a grudge. She watched Judge Chen's face, and she saw the judge take it seriously. And for a moment, the courtroom felt like it was tilting Sterling's way. Then it was Ava's counsel's turn, but Ava did something that made her own lawyer's head snap toward her in alarm. She stood up herself. "Your Honor, may I address the court directly? I'm the defendant in substance here. I'd like to answer the accusation in my own words." Judge Chen raised an eyebrow. "This is irregular, Ms. Sinclair. Your attorneys are perfectly capable." "They are, Your Honor. But Mr. Sterling has accused me of concealing my intentions. I think the court deserves to hear my intentions from me directly, and I'll be brief." The judge studied her for a long moment. 2 minutes. "And Ms. Sinclair, if you say anything that damages your own case, that's on you, not your lawyers." "Understood." 3:41. Ava stepped out from behind the table, and she stood in the well of the courtroom, and she spoke plainly the way her mother had taught her to speak, without ornament, without performance. "Your Honor, Mr. Sterling says I concealed my intention. He's right. I did conceal it. I told no one, not even my own board, that when I walked into Whitman Tower this morning, I intended to walk in as a stranger dressed as an ordinary person to see with my own eyes how this company treated people it believed had no power. I concealed that, and I'd do it again." The courtroom was silent. But here is what Mr. Sterling is very carefully not telling you. He says I fired the leadership on a personal vendetta. The truth is that I fired them because in 45 minutes in that lobby, 6 executives called me homeless, asked if I spoke English, threatened to have me arrested, mocked me, and physically laid hands on me, all on camera, all documented. That's not a vendetta, Your Honor. That's cause. And the reason it matters to this court is this. She turned, and she looked at Warren Sterling. "Mr. Sterling represents to you that this is a clean company whose stability I've disrupted. But my forensic team discovered during a lawful due diligence process he now calls fraudulent, that this company has been defrauding its poorest clients for at least 6 years. 206 accounts, $30 million. And Your Honor, I received a phone call 90 minutes ago on my way to this courthouse that I believe the court needs to hear about. Sterling's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is far outside the scope of a TRO hearing. It goes directly to the plaintiff's claim of clean hands, Your Honor, Ava said calmly. Mr. Sterling is asking you to protect a company he calls stable and lawful. I'm prepared to demonstrate that the company is neither and that Mr. Sterling personally signed the document that started the fraud. Judge Chen leaned forward. I'll allow it, briefly. This had better be real, Ms. Sinclair. Thomas, Ava said, and Thomas Wu rose from the gallery with a folder. My chief of staff has 3 things. A memo signed by Warren Sterling 6 years ago titled Tiered Regional Fee Optimization, which designed the discriminatory fee structure. Phone and email records showing that Richard Vance, the CEO Mr. Sterling personally mentored, administered those fees for the 6 years since. And a sworn statement given in the last hour from Elena Vasquez, a client of 9 years, who was told by Richard Vance and I, quote her exactly, that people like her should be grateful the company let her bank there at all. The words landed in the courtroom like stones dropped into a well, and Ava watched Warren Sterling's tanned face change color for the second time that day. Your Honor, Ava said quietly. Mr. Sterling came here asking you to freeze my control of this company so that he could restore the old leadership. I'd ask the court to consider what he was really asking. He was asking you to put the people who built and ran a 6-year fraud against poor families back in charge of those same families' money. That's not stability, Your Honor. That's protecting the crime scene. 353. Judge Chen took the folder. She read the memo. She read Elena Vasquez's statement, and when she looked up, her weary, unimpressible face had acquired an expression that Ava recognized because she had seen it on the board members' faces that morning, the expression of a person watching their assumptions collapse. Mr. Sterling, Judge Chen said, is this your signature? Sterling's lawyer leaned toward him urgently, whispering, but Warren Sterling was not a man accustomed to being coached, and the arrogance that had built his empire betrayed him one final time. Your Honor, Sterling said, waving his lawyer off standing. That memo is being wildly mischaracterized. It was a legitimate risk-based pricing model. Every financial institution in this country uses risk-based pricing. The fact that this woman has dressed it up in the language of civil rights doesn't change the fundamental— Mr. Sterling, Judge Chen interrupted, I didn't ask you to defend it. I asked if it was your signature. A long pause. Yes, Warren Sterling said. It's my signature, but— Then let me tell you what I see, Judge Chen said, and her voice had gone hard as the bench in front of her. I see a plaintiff asking me to freeze a lawful transaction on the grounds that the new owner has disrupted a stable company. And I see in the plaintiff's own admitted signature evidence that the company was engaged in a systematic overcharging of clients in low-income neighborhoods. You came into my courtroom, Mr. Sterling, asking me to invoke the equitable power of this court to protect you. Equity requires clean hands. Yours are not clean. They are not remotely clean. She set down the folder. Your motion for a temporary restraining order is denied, and I'll tell you something else off the record and then on it. If a fraction of what I've just read holds up, you should be far more worried about the people who prosecute crimes than the people who preside over civil motions. This court is done with you for today. We're adjourned. The gavel came down, and Warren Sterling stood frozen at the plaintiff's table in a courtroom that had turned against him in the space of 12 minutes, exactly as his executives had turned pale in an elevator that morning, and Ava Sinclair gathered her things and she walked past him toward the door. Warren, she said quietly, stopping beside him one last time, you asked me this morning who I am and where I come from, and I told you. But you weren't really listening because you never listen to people you've already decided don't matter. So let me say it one more time slowly so it sticks. She leaned in. I come from the people you overcharged. And today in a courtroom in front of a judge that turned out to be the most powerful thing a person could possibly be. You should have looked, Warren. All those years, you should have looked. Awesome. And she walked out, leaving the founder of Whitman Financial standing alone at a table his own lawyers were quietly abandoning. And outside the courthouse, the press surged toward her, and this time Ava stopped, and she gave them one sentence. The court just refused to protect a 6-year fraud against working families, she said. Whitman Financial belongs to its clients and its honest employees now. That's all I have to say today. 4:11. The car pulled away from the courthouse back toward the tower, and for the first time all day, Ava allowed herself to lean back against the seat and close her eyes just for a moment, and she thought about her mother. Her phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. Closing bell in 19 minutes. Interim team held the line. Stock down 2% on the news but recovering. And chairwoman, you should know. Since the story broke, 41 more clients have called in, all saying the same thing, all wanting to talk about their fees. Ava read it twice, and something tightened in her chest because 41 calls in a few hours meant the 206 accounts her team had found were only the ones that left a digital trail. The real number was larger. It was always larger. The rot went deeper than even her forensic team had reached, and she understood now that this was not a project of a few weeks. This was the work of years. This was perhaps the work of the rest of her life. She typed back a single line. Set up a hotline. Every call gets a human being, not a machine. Starting tonight. Then she added a second line. And Thomas, where's David Miller? The reply came quickly. Waiting for you on 44, exactly like you asked. Been there since 2. Wouldn't leave. Said you told him to come and he wasn't going anywhere until he saw you. And Ava Sinclair in the back of a car in Manhattan traffic on the strangest and most consequential day of her life felt something she had not let herself feel all day, and it was not triumph and it was not exhaustion. It was hope. Because a company was just a building full of people, and you could fire the cruel ones and expose the corrupt ones and beat the powerful ones in court, but none of that built anything. What built something was a 23-year-old security guard who wouldn't leave the 44th floor because a woman he barely knew had told him decency mattered, and he had decided against all the evidence of his short, hard life to believe her. 4:31. The car pulled up to Whitman Tower. And Ava Sinclair walked back through the same revolving door she had entered that morning as a stranger in a $40 coat, except now the lobby was different, and she felt it the moment she stepped inside. Chelsea at the reception desk stood up straight and said clearly, warmly, so the whole lobby could hear, "Good afternoon, Chairwoman Sinclair. Welcome back." And a woman Ava didn't recognize, an older woman in the uniform of the cleaning staff who had come in early for the evening shift, stopped pushing her cart and simply looked at Ava with tears in her eyes and pressed one hand to her own heart and nodded the way one soldier nods to another across a battlefield. Ava crossed the marble floor, the same floor where she had been called a thief that morning, and she stopped in front of the older woman with the cart. "What's your name?" Ava asked. "Rosa," the woman said. "Rosa Delgado. I clean these floors, ma'am, 14 years. Her voice trembled. "I heard what you said this morning, about the night shift, about the people who come in after everyone goes home. Nobody, ma'am, nobody in 14 years ever said those words in this building. Nobody ever said we mattered." And Ava Sinclair took Rosa Delgado's weathered hand in both of hers, the same kind of hand her own mother had roughened by exactly the same work, and she held it right there in the middle of the marble lobby in front of everyone. "You've always mattered, Rosa," she said. "It just took this building far too long to have someone at the top who was raised to know it. My mother did this work. 30 years. So when I look at you, I don't see the cleaning staff. I see my mother, and nobody is ever going to walk past you in this building again like you're not there. I promise you that." Rosa Delgado wept, and Ava held her hand until she was ready, and the lobby was silent, and it was a different kind of silence than the mornings. The kind of silence that comes when people are witnessing something they will tell their families about that night. Then Ava let go gently, and she straightened, and she looked toward the elevators, and she thought about the young man waiting 9 floors up who had refused to leave. 4:38. 2 hours and 40 minutes passed when the markets had closed on a company that was hers. Truly, hers now fought for and won and defended in a courtroom, and there was still so much work ahead. Years of it. The 41 calls and the hundreds more that would come, the refunds, the reforms, the reckoning. But right now in this moment there was a security guard on the 44th floor who had believed her when she told him decency was worth more than a title. And Ava Sinclair walked to the executive elevator, the same one she had been physically blocked from entering that morning, and she stepped inside without anyone stopping her, and she pressed the button for the 44th floor, and as the doors slid closed, she caught her own reflection in the polished steel, a black woman in a dark suit, 36 years old, the daughter of a woman who had cleaned offices at night, standing alone in the elevator of the company she now owned. And she thought as the elevator began to rise that her mother would have liked Rosa Delgado, that her mother would have liked David Miller, that her mother, who had pointed at the horizon through the window of an office she was paid to clean, and told her little girl that someday she would own everything the light touched, had been right all along. The elevator climbed, 26, 27, 28, the same numbers she had watched climb that morning with 6 terrified executives crowded around her, except now she was alone, and now she was not rising toward a confrontation. She was rising toward a beginning. The doors opened on the 44th floor, and there, exactly where Thomas had said he would be, stood David Miller, still in his security uniform, twisting his cap in his hands, and when he saw Ava, his whole young face lit up with a nervous, hopeful, disbelieving light. "You came," he said. I wasn't sure you'd really. Everybody said I was crazy for waiting, but I figured you said to come, so." "I said to come," Ava agreed, stepping out of the elevator. "And you came, and you waited almost 3 hours. Why?" David Miller looked at her, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that Ava Sinclair would carry with her for the rest of her life. "Because this morning," he said, "you were the only person who ever asked me my first name. And I figured anybody who'd do that on the worst morning of her life, when everybody was treating her like dirt, that's somebody worth waiting for." And Ava Sinclair, who had not cried once all day, who had endured the lobby and the boardroom and the courtroom and the press, without a single tear, felt her eyes sting at last. "David," she said, "come with me. There's a lot we need to talk about. And it starts with what you want your life to look like, because I don't think it looks like a security uniform, and I think you've known that for a while." She put a hand on his shoulder, and she turned him toward the long, bright corridor, toward the boardroom, toward the future, and the two of them walked down it together, the daughter of a night shift cleaner, and the security guard, who had been the only decent man in the building, walking side by side into the company they were going to rebuild. 4:43 in the afternoon. And Ava Sinclair had never in her entire life felt more like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Ava Sinclair had never felt more like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. But being where you're supposed to be and staying there are two different things, and the weeks that followed would test whether one hard day could truly become a new beginning, or whether the old rot would find a way to grow back the moment the cameras left. She and David Miller sat in the boardroom that afternoon for nearly an hour, and Ava did most of the listening because she had learned that the fastest way to understand a building was to talk to the people who watched it when nobody thought they were watching. "Tell me about the ones who left," she said. "The good people. In your 14 months who quit, that shouldn't have..." David didn't even have to think. "There was a woman in compliance, Keisha. Smart, ma'am, scary smart. She flagged something about a year ago, some account thing. I don't know the details, but I know she went to Mr. Pierce with it, and 2 months later she was gone. Everybody said she quit, but the way she cleaned out her desk, the way she wouldn't look at anybody, I don't think she quit. I think they pushed her." 5:19. And Ava wrote the name down in her portfolio, the same portfolio she had written 6 executives' names in that morning. Keisha, compliance, flagged something, pushed out. "Thomas," she said into her phone. "One more name for the list. Keisha, last name unknown, formerly in compliance, departed roughly 10 months ago. I want to know what she flagged, who she flagged it to, and where she is now. And Thomas, if she was pushed out for doing the right thing, I want her back." Because that, Ava had decided, was going to be the real measure of everything. Not how many bad people she removed. Anybody with power could remove people. The measure was how many good people she could bring back, how many Keishas were out there somewhere working jobs beneath them, carrying the quiet wound of having done the right thing and been punished for it. If she could find even a few of them and undo that wound, then the day would have meant something more than 6 firings and a headline. David left at 6, but not before Ava did something that made his knees actually buckle. She offered him a place in a leadership development program she was creating on the spot, full salary, full tuition, a path off the security floor and into whatever he wanted to become. "I can't accept that," David said, stunned. "I didn't do anything. I paused, that's all. Anybody would have—" "No," Ava said, and it was the same word she had said to Richard Vance that morning, and it carried the same weight. "Not anybody. That's the whole point, David. That's been the point of this entire day. Not anybody would have. You did, and I reward that. Take the offer. Your mother didn't raise a man who says no to his own future out of politeness." David Miller took the offer. And when he left the building that night, he was not the same young man who had walked in that morning, and neither in truth was anyone. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Not the story Warren Sterling had tried to plant, the real one. New owner uncovers 6-year fraud against poor clients, fires executives who humiliated her in lobby. The security footage, released in full, as Ava had promised, ran on every network. The nation watched Gary Pruitt snap his fingers, watched Diane Holloway ask if Ava spoke English, watched Jonathan Pierce crouch down and threaten a jail cell, watched Sandra Kowalski circle her prey, and watched Richard Vance grab a woman by the collar of her coat and shove her toward the door of a building she already owned. And America watching felt something it did not often get to feel, which was the clean, uncomplicated satisfaction of watching the powerful be wrong about exactly the person they should not have been wrong about. 7 days after the lobby, the federal investigation opened. Ava had expected it had in fact invited it by handing the SEC and the Department of Justice everything her forensic team had found. But even she was not prepared for how fast it moved or how deep it went. Because once federal investigators started pulling threads, the whole garment came apart. The 206 accounts became 400. The 400 became 619. The 30 million became 47. And buried in the records, investigators found something Ava's team had missed, a pattern of the fees being quietly increased every single time a client from those neighborhoods complained, as though the complaint itself had been treated as a reason to punish them further. They didn't just overcharge them, Patricia Okonkwo said grimly in a board meeting 2 weeks in. They penalized them for noticing. That's the part that's going to end careers beyond the 6 we already removed. That's chairwoman, that's not negligence. That's malice with a spreadsheet. "I know," Ava said quietly. "I've known since the first day." It was in Elena Vasquez's voice on the phone. "You don't sound like that after an accident. You sound like that after someone chose you." The consequences came for all of them, and they came in the order of their guilt. Warren Sterling, the founder, was the first to fall the hardest. The memo he had admitted signing in open court became the cornerstone of the federal case, and the arrogance that had made him wave off his own lawyer became the thing that sank him, because a signed admission under oath is not something even the best attorneys can walk back. He settled eventually to avoid a criminal trial he was certain to lose, and the settlement stripped away most of the fortune he had spent 30 years building on the backs of people he never bothered to see. The permanent board seat was already gone. The reputation went next. And the last time his name appeared in the financial press, it was in a single dry sentence, noting that the founder of Whitman Financial had been barred from serving as an officer or director of any public company for the rest of his life. Richard Vance fell differently, and in some ways worse, because Elena Vasquez was not the only one. Once the hotline Ava had ordered went live, once every call reached a human being instead of a machine, the stories poured in, and Richard Vance's name was in dozens of them. The man who administered the fees, the man who told a widow she should be grateful to bank there at all, the man who had grabbed Ava's collar in a lobby full of witnesses. His contract protections had died with his for cause termination, exactly as Ava had told him they would, and now the lawsuits came client after client, and the industry that had once feared him would not return his calls. And the daughter in college he had begged Ava to think about ended up transferring to a state school, which was, Ava reflected when she heard it, a genuine tragedy, because the daughter had done nothing, and children never choose their fathers. She made a quiet, anonymous arrangement to cover the girl's tuition. She never told anyone. Not even Thomas, because her mother had taught her that mercy you announce is not mercy, it's just another kind of performance, and Ava had watched enough performance in that lobby to last a lifetime. The other four scattered into the smaller fates that await people who were cruel but not criminal. Gary Pruitt. 22 years of sales relationships found that relationships built on being the loudest man in the room evaporate the moment you're no longer in any room that matters. Diane Holloway landed a job at a smaller firm and lost it within a month when the footage followed her there. Marcus Reed, the head of HR, who had buried 138 complaints, became the subject of his own investigation, and the profession that is supposed to protect employees quietly made sure he would never work in it again. And Sandra Kowalski, who had wept in the boardroom, wrote Ava a letter 3 weeks later. It was 4 pages long. Ava read all 4. It was an apology, a real one without excuses, and it ended with a line Ava did not expect. "You were right about my mother. I mean your mother. You said she was worth 10 of me. I've thought about that every day. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worth even 1 of her." Ava did not write back, but she kept the letter. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do with an apology is simply let it be true. A month after the lobby, Thomas found Keisha. Her full name was Keisha Warren, and she was working as a bookkeeper for a nonprofit in Queens, making a third of what she had made at Whitman. And when Thomas explained why he was calling, there was a long silence on the line. And then Keisha Warren said, in a voice that had clearly waited a very long time to be believed, "It took 11 months for someone to ask me what I found. 11 months. And then she told them. She had flagged the fee pattern almost a year before Ava's forensic team ever found it. She had taken it to Jonathan Pierce exactly as protocol required. And Jonathan Pierce had thanked her and told her he would handle it. And 2 months later, she had been managed out of the company on a manufactured performance issue. Her career quietly poisoned her, warning buried in the same grave as 138 complaints. Ava flew to Queens herself to meet her. She did not send Thomas. She went in person because some things a chairwoman does not delegate. "I owe you an apology on behalf of a company I didn't own when it happened to you." Ava told Keisha Warren sitting across from her in a small kitchen in Queens, "You did everything right. You followed the rules. You told the truth to the exact person you were supposed to tell it to. And they destroyed you for it. That's not a failure of the system, Keisha. You were the system working. They broke the system to silence you." Keisha Warren's eyes filled. "I thought I was crazy," she said. "For a year I thought maybe I'd made it all up. Maybe I really was bad at my job, because that's what they told everyone. And after a while, you start to believe the story other people tell about you." "I know," Ava said, and she did know in a way that went all the way back to a 2-bedroom apartment in Baltimore. "I know exactly how that feels, which is why I'm not just offering you your job back. I'm offering you a new one. I want you to run compliance for the entire company, all of it. The department that failed you is going to be led by the one person who proved she couldn't be corrupted because they tried and they couldn't." Keisha Warren came back to Whitman Financial 3 weeks later, not as a bookkeeper, not as a wronged former employee, but as chief compliance officer. And on her first day, she walked past the reception desk, where Chelsea greeted her warmly by name, and past the security post, where David Miller, now enrolled in the leadership program, gave her a nod, and she rode the executive elevator to the 44th floor. And she understood that she had walked into a different building than the one that had thrown her away. And that more than the firings, more than the courtroom, more than the headlines, was the thing Ava Sinclair was proudest of. Because anyone can tear down. She had spent one morning tearing down, but it took months to build, and it took bringing back the people who had been thrown away, and it took a young security guard's belief, and an old cleaning woman's tears, and a compliance officer's vindication, and slowly, floor by floor. The building filled with people who understood that things had changed at the root. 6 weeks after the lobby, Ava stood in front of the entire company, every employee from the board to the mailroom, from the trading floor to the night shift cleaning crew, whom she had specifically asked to come in during daylight hours for once on the clock, paid seated in the front rows where they could see. "I'm not going to talk long," Ava said, and by now the whole company knew that when Ava Sinclair said that, she meant it. 6 weeks ago, I walked into our lobby, and 6 people decided I was nobody. They were wrong about who I was, but that's not the lesson. If the only lesson is that they picked the wrong nobody, then we've learned nothing, because it means the problem was just bad luck that they humiliated the one person who happened to own the building, and that's a coward's lesson. The room was silent. The real lesson, Ava went on, is that there is no such thing as a nobody. Not the delivery driver they thought I was. Not the homeless woman they accused me of being. Not Rosa, who cleans these floors at night. Not David, who watched that door for 14 months before anyone asked his name. Not Keisha, who told the truth and paid for it for a year. Every single person who walks through our door is somebody. And from this day forward, this company is going to operate as though we cannot possibly know who anyone is, which means we are going to treat every human being as though they might be the most important person we will ever meet, because sometimes they are. And even when they're not, they deserve it anyway. She let that settle, and then she announced the thing that would outlast her. The thing that would still be running long after this day was a story people told. We're launching a company-wide standard. I'm calling it the Equal Standard Protocol. It's not a poster. It's not a training video you click through and forget. It is a binding operating principle written into every job description in this company from mine down. Every person who enters this building, client or stranger executive or applicant, is to be treated as though they belong in the highest room in the building. Not because we know they do, because we can never be sure they don't. And the enforcement of it will be led by our Chief Compliance Officer, Keisha Warren, who knows better than anyone in this room what it costs when a company decides some people don't matter. The applause that followed was not the tentative, astonished applause of the lobby 6 weeks earlier. It was something fuller, something that had grown roots. And Ava let it wash over her, and she thought as she always did in the moments that mattered about her mother. That evening, after the building had emptied, Ava did something she had been meaning to do for 6 weeks. She went back down to the lobby, alone. No entourage, no security, no Thomas, just the way she had come in that first morning. And she stood in the middle of the marble floor, in the exact spot where Richard Vance had grabbed her collar and called her a thief, and she stood there for a long time in the quiet. Rosa Delgado found her there, pushing her cart, starting the night shift. "Chairwoman," Rosa said softly, "you're here late." "I wanted to see it empty," Ava said, "the way you see it, after everyone's gone home." Rosa came and stood beside her, and the two women looked at the lobby together, the marble and the glass and the reception desk and the executive elevator, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "Can I tell you something, Chairwoman?" Rosa said finally. "Please, my daughter. She's 15. Since all this happened, since the news, she's been telling everyone at her school. My mother cleans the floors in the building the lady owns. The lady who used to be nobody. And chairwoman, before this, my daughter never told anyone what I do. She was ashamed. 15 years I clean, and my own daughter was ashamed." Rosa's voice broke. "But now she tells everyone, because you made it something to be proud of. You made the night shift something a girl could brag about at school." And Ava Sinclair, standing in the lobby where she had been humiliated 6 weeks before, felt her eyes fill, and this time she let them. "Rosa," she said, "when I was your daughter's age, I was ashamed too. My mother cleaned offices like this one, and I used to lie about it. I told people she worked in an office, which was true technically. I just didn't say what she did there." Ava wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, not caring the way Bill Hargrove hadn't cared in the boardroom. "It took me until I was a grown woman to understand that my mother was the strongest, most dignified person I have ever known, and that the shame was never hers to carry. It was mine for believing the world's lie about what makes a person matter. So when you tell me your daughter brags about you now, Rosa, you've just given me the best thing anyone has given me since all of this began. Because that's what it was all for, so that no girl has to be ashamed of a mother who works with her hands." The two women stood together in the empty lobby, and outside the tall glass windows, the city glittered, and somewhere in that city there were 1,000 other buildings with 1,000 other lobbies, and Ava knew she could not fix all of them. But she had fixed this one. And a person only gets one life, and one building at a time is how you change a world. A year later, the story had a coda that even Ava had not predicted. The Equal Standard Protocol did not stay inside Whitman Financial. It could not, because too many people had seen the footage and too many companies had watched a founder lose his empire and a CEO lose his career over 45 minutes in a lobby, and fear is a powerful teacher even when decency is not. Other firms began adopting versions of it, then whole industries. A senator cited it in a hearing. A business school built a case study around it. And the phrase, "treat every person as though they belong in the highest room in the building," began appearing on walls, in buildings Ava had never entered, in cities she had never visited. She did not take credit for it. When reporters asked, she always said the same thing. "I didn't invent it. My mother invented it on her knees at night in a building full of people who never once looked at her. I just finally had the power to write it down." And the 206 accounts, which had become 619, which had become, in the final accounting, over 800 families, were all made whole. Every dollar returned with interest. Elena Vasquez used her refund to pay off her house. Ava heard about it and cried in her office for 10 minutes, then wiped her face and went back to work, because that is what her mother would have done. David Miller finished the leadership program and took a job in the very department that had once employed the man who grabbed Ava's collar. Keisha Warren ran the cleanest compliance operation in the industry. Chelsea, the receptionist, was promoted to head of guest experience, a role Ava created specifically because the first face a person sees should belong to someone who understands in their bones that they might be greeting the most important person they will ever meet. And Rosa Delgado's daughter, the 15-year-old, who now bragged about her mother, received on her 18th birthday a full scholarship from a foundation. Ava had established a foundation that existed for exactly one purpose: to send the children of night shift workers to any college they could get into. Ava Sinclair never forgot that morning. She kept the $40 coat. It hung in her office on a simple hook where every executive who came to see her could see it. And when they asked, she told them what it was and why it was there. It was there to remind everyone who entered that room herself. Most of all, that the most expensive mistake a person can make is deciding before they have asked a single question that the human being in front of them does not matter. Because they had assumed she was nobody. They had built a whole company on the idea that some people are nobody. And it had all come apart, every bit of it, the founder and the CEO and the executives and the fraud, all of it in the space of one morning, because 6 powerful people looked at a woman in a plain gray coat and could not be bothered to learn her name. Ava Sinclair had spent her whole life being underestimated, and on the most important morning of that life, she had turned the underestimation of others into the instrument of their undoing, and then harder and rarer and more lasting, she had turned it into something that would protect the next person and the next and the next. They refused to see her, so she made sure that in the building she built from the ruins of theirs, no one would ever be invisible again. And that promise, kept every single day in every single room, from the highest office to the lobby where it all began, was the truest and most permanent victory of her life. The woman they refused to see had become the one thing none of them could ever look away from again. And she had done it not with anger but with certainty, not with cruelty but with a mirror, not to punish the past but to guarantee the future. Ava Sinclair had walked into that lobby, a stranger they dismissed in seconds. She walked out of this story, the standard against which an entire industry would measure its own decency. And no one ever again would make the mistake of assuming the wrong woman didn't matter.